you know, like if we brought back slavery, that would be great for the GDP. Do you know what I mean? Because like we have like basically free labor.
I mean,
but essentially when you look down to like human rights and all that stuff, clearly that's a negative for society. Do you know what I mean?
So if you kind of accept the general principle that like it'd be good to spend a very small amount of our budget to save millions of lives, even if those millions of lives are overseas, then it seems like you should also believe that, you know, USAID, at least on the whole, was a good program because USAID was about 0.8% of the US's budget, and it helped saved millions of people's lives.
Yeah, like just look at you can just look at London. Look at what's happening in England at the moment.
That's because
it's this whole thing of like the anti-Western attitude and all stuff. But like, let's not forget October the 8th, the day after the October 7th attacks happened. They were all out and marching. They're all saying it's like, yeah, like we need to stop Israel, all this kind of shit.
Trump has done a lot of damage with the uncertainty from tariffs. You're right that he's a wild card, and you know you don't know that exact day, you know, what the tariff on Vietnam is going to be because it's going to change. It's going to change, you know, 5 times in that very day. But folks, liking and subscribing really helps me continue to produce content and is greatly appreciated. You can also make sure to check out my Discord server in the description below, where you can also find my Twitch, my Kick, and my Twitter. Right, so I mean, I reached out a little bit ago because I'm doing a charity subathon, by the way. Okay, folks, you know, Shrimp Welfare Project, very highly effective charity, so you guys should check my stream out, donate to the Shrimp Welfare Project later on if you guys can. But regardless, I reached out. I think I saw you talking a little bit about this on Sarah's panel at one point. I don't know. I guess like broadly, I think Trump's policy with regard to the economy have been like all pretty disastrous, and I'm very curious of the opinions of people who defend it. And my understanding is you defend most of it at the very least. I don't know where exactly you draw the lines and things.
Yeah, so like my general like opinion or theory about what's going on is that it really does not matter who's in office. It's the same fucking National Socialist agenda that's getting pushed, and no matter what aspect you're looking at it. In terms of Trump stuff, particularly with the tariffs, I think this is exactly why they want them in, is to cause this whole like chaos. I think is probably the best word, but a lot of people take negative connotations to that. But essentially, you have this a shit ton of like chaos in the markets, so then everybody's unstable. So when you're going in to negotiate, your opponent's on level footing, but you're at least, you know, you actually have a game plan to it as well. So in terms of that, I can understand why, like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh shit, what the fuck? Because there is that uncertainty, but if you want to get the best deals, you have to make sure your opponent's off step, kind of thing, you know.
Okay, so I do want to get into that. I have a lot of responses to that. I want to ask a few things as well. So first of all, like how do you feel about the big beautiful bill? How much do you know about that?
Oh man, that was like, you should have seen me like that on top of the Iran situation. I was like, what the fuck is this motherfucker doing?
Okay.
But yeah, like this whole thing, like I said, like no matter who we put in the office, it's just more government spending. This is more socialism in my eyes. You know what I mean? So unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Okay. How do we feel about do you know any of the stuff that's happening with the BLS or the Federal Reserve right now?
Not a ton, no. Like the way, like I said, like if I was to have my way, because again, just to kind of like give a bit of clarity and all that, because of fog of war, all that kind of stuff. A lot of people probably see me on Sarah's panel, like think I'm conservative, Christian, all this kind of shit. But it's like, no, like even Sarah herself is on panel saying, you sound like a liberal nowadays, Sarah. My whole game, like I think anarcho-capitalism is the way to go. Just reduce all this government power and then let the markets play itself out.
Okay.
But like I said, when you look at the current system, like all these markets are basically so much regulation that the government decides who ends up winner, who ends up loser. So the way I kind of look at it, like any kind of like deregulation that we can push, like any kind of like reducing the government overspending, that's my kind of thing. In terms of with the Trump stuff, if you're to say, okay, what is Trump's actual plan to these tariffs? I wouldn't have a clue. All I'd know is that I'd point out he's putting everybody uneasy with all the tariffs, making them uncertain. And then from there, like I said, he's going to try to negotiate these deals, but we'll see how it plays out.
Well, I think so. I guess to get into that a little bit, I'm skeptical Trump even like actually has a plan. Like you know, you say like Trump is, you know, creating this chaos or whatever so he can get, you know, better deals and put people on the back foot and everything. I think there's a good chance, you know, Trump is either like genuinely changes his mind very often about these things, or like he is like listening to what his last advisors told him. Like, for example, like the big Liberation Day, April 2nd tariffs, you know, that was mostly done on the advice of Peter Navarro. And once Peter Navarro had to, like, I think, go overseas for a trip, there were two other of his advisors who talked to him and convinced him to do a 90-day pause for those tariffs. So I don't even know if Trump himself, like, has any of this massive plan or whatever. And then I guess the second thing that'd be confusing to me is that, like, you know, all these, you know, you say, like, you think anarcho-capitalism is the way to go, when tariffs, I think, very much bring us in the opposite direction. And even the deals that Trump has got, which I don't think are, you know, they're not deals. They're phase one, you know, one day eventually maybe we'll sign a better legally binding agreement deal. All these deals are leaving up at least 10% tariffs on all of our trading partners, right? We're leaving up 19% on Vietnam, like 15% on the EU. That's not anywhere close to anarcho-capitalism that represents a large tax increase on Americans. You're muted, at least on Discord.
Thank you. Yeah, I always do that. It's like a meme at this stage. But yeah, like I said, like Trump is not an anarcho-capitalist. I mean, like I said, it's this whole like economy or kind of like agenda, I'd call it, is it's getting pushed down just more and more government spending. Like you see the big beautiful bill. I thought we were all for Doge. I thought we're all about getting rid of government waste, all this kind of shit. And then the whole domestic between him and Elon. So, like I said, in terms of my aspect, there's tons of stuff that, like I said, I can hold my hand up and say I don't agree with this aspect of Trump. Like I said, I can understand at least the whole thing of like just causing pure chaos and then trying to put people in a, one would say, coercive position to make sure you sign a better deal for the country, essentially.
Well, but I mean, so again, like my contention would be, one, I'm skeptical there even is like this master plan or whatever. But like if your end goal or whatever is anarcho-capitalism, all these deals are getting us further away from that, right? We're imposing tariffs, which, you know, that's a government tax, that's a government artificial protection to certain sectors on, you know, on all our trading partners, on even our close allies like Korea. I mean, we're semi-allies with Vietnam. We cooperate with them at least in some cases, but on, you know, Europe and the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, like I said, in terms of the way the American dynamic works, it's not like you have a party for each political view. It's either Trump or Kamala. And the way I was analyzing it was, it's either nationalism or socialism. And I was like, fuck it, we might as well pick nationalism, just for the sake of like trying to stay away from as much government spending. It's because like, even when you look at the USAID shit, man, it's like, why is there 27,000 US taxpayers dollars getting paid for like a musical in Ireland? You know what I'm saying? It makes no sense.
$27,000 is that's the big amount of socialism, really. That's the big deal, not the fact that the
No. What I'm saying is the main premise for even that transaction to go through. Like what? Like, folks, we need to explain this. Why are you spending so much? Like, I'm asking Americans, why are you spending your taxpayer dollars on shit in Ireland or like a musical? Like, this is not as like it was like military aid or whatever. Like, this was actually like a musical that they spent it on. It's like, hang on a second, like I thought this was supposed to be like, you know, more legit. Like, it's supposed to be government funding. Everything is like, you know, red tape. I mean, all this kind of shit. So, like I said, the way I looked at it is like, at least Trump is, you know.
I do want to get back to Kamala Harris and the economic policies of the relative policies of economic policies of them more generally later on. But like, just briefly on the USAID thing. So like, you know, for whatever criticisms you have with like USAID funding transgender Sesame Street in Iraq or whatever, do you like acknowledge it also did like a pretty large amount of good in terms of just giving people food and giving people medical aid in the third world?
No, if the price is, you know, to either like enable militia groups to destabilize the country or just to set an agenda, no, like I don't think that's like the greater good argument kind of applies there.
Well, no. So, you know, you might have problems with, to whatever extent you think they were engaged with shady things. Now, since the Cold War, I don't think they've actually done that many shady things. During the Cold War, I think they did do a few shady things, but not that many. Not nearly as many as a lot of people think. But we do like, don't you think PEPFAR, for example, was just like really good? Do you know what PEPFAR is?
No. But is it like, you know, some sort of aid or? food.
Yeah,
or
it's like
supplies or
a
something
program where we essentially, my understanding of it is we give infants like medicine, or I think we give actually, technically I think it goes to pregnant mothers. It might go to infants as soon as they're born, but it essentially prevents a lot of children from being born with AIDS, and it prevents children from being born with AIDS in countries where they're poor enough that such that they can't afford aid medication. So, in the US, if you get AIDS, your life might be a little worse, but like that's not a death sentence at this point because we have treatments for, AIDS or whatever that most people can afford. Most people have insurance. In the third world, in a lot of these African countries, if you get AIDS, you're essentially fucked because you just can't afford treatment, and like there's a very good chance you're going to die. So preventing children from being born with AIDS is very good, and it's probably saved over like at least 19 million lives since it's in the 15 years it's existed.
Yeah, so in the situation of like what was it like in the West 100 years ago, if you got AIDS or anything like that, it was the same situation. It was basically a death sentence. Do you know what I mean? So in terms of like our moral imperative shouldn't be that we need to spend all our taxpayers to make sure there's no harm or anything like that in the world. The way it should be done is put down to the base taxes. Because I'll give you like a counter, like for example, like with the Catholic Church, like they done a lot of missionary stuff and a lot of good, but they also done a lot of evil. The church sex scandals, all this kind of stuff.
Okay, so for one, like PEPFAR was a very low, it wasn't even a big part of USAID's budget, right? Like it's a pretty minuscule part of the budget. I forget the nominal amount, but I know it's like it's like $20 per American per year, right? Like that seems like a very, and if it saves millions of lives a year, that seems like a very effective program. I guess like the question I would ask is like, do you think like if the U.S. could have prevented the Holocaust for, let's say, 0.8% of GDP, like it would have been good to prevent the Holocaust for 0.8% of GDP?
Yeah, like that's where this I think this whole discussion is going to be like come down to it. It's like there's a lot of, let's say, moral imperatives that people would say you need to do this, so you can't just bring it down to a factor. Like for example, like if we brought back slavery, that would be great for the GDP. Do you know what I mean? Because like we have like basically free labor.
I mean,
but essentially when you look down to like human rights and all this stuff, clearly that's a negative for society. Do you know what I mean? Well, like I said, in terms of the whole kind of dynamic to like this whole thing of like the premise was like, oh well, USAID does good, so there might be like some nefarious agendas that are in here, but like it does a net benefit. But that's why I kind of give the counter of like the Catholic Church. It's like many people are, especially the priest, would have said we're doing a net benefit. It's like, yeah, these kids.
So okay, so for one, I think it obviously is. Like I would hold that slavery is not a net benefit even for the economy, most likely. But regardless of that,
just in terms of the figures.
I don't think that's true because like you're hurting, essentially wherever the workers would have gone, had they been available for hire, as just essentially free laborers, and you're hurting the producers that would, slaves don't have much consumption of their own, right? They're not buying things, their masters buying the bare minimum, things for them. So I think you're probably hurting the consumption aspect as well. I don't think that you would see an efficient allocation of resources under slavery or whatever. So I'm skeptical of that in the first place.
Numbers.
But
just from the numbers, like labor costs go to zero if you have slaves.
Okay, but not exactly zero, but you do recognize like you would be hurt. So let's just focus like slaves don't have much consumption of their own. We acknowledge that part, right?
Yeah, sure.
So presumably if the slaves in the counterfactual where the slaves were not slaves, they would be buying more goods, right?
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
So relative to the counterfactual of where the slaves aren't slaves, they're free laborers. There are there are other businesses that are hurt by the fact that people are slaves, even if some businesses are helped by their labor cost being zero.
Not necessarily, no, because just because they're slaves in the society doesn't mean that the majority or even everyone in society is slaves. You know what I mean? So in terms of spending,
that's not,
for example,
that's not necessary for my argument.
But if Trump was to, let's say, pass some sort of executive order that we will accept in anybody from outside of the US, but they basically get this, servitude status. Do you know what I mean? To work around the whole slavery. So like in terms of like the whole servitude aspect, like you can just import in all this labor that essentially slave labor, but for these companies, it's going to boost their profits. So all I'm pointing out here is in terms of this dynamic where it's like, just because the figure is better doesn't mean that it's morally better, kind of thing, you know?
So, well, I mean, as a general principle, like, I agree with that. Like, I do think, like, I think GDP correlates very well with things I do want to maximize for, but I don't think GDP on its own or anything like intrinsically valuable or whatever. But I do have reason to believe that slavery would not even lead to efficient allocation of resources. And, it's not necessary for my argument that the majority of the population has to be slaves. You could have a very small population of slaves. Nonetheless, those slaves would be consuming goods that they are not consuming, because they are slaves. So there are some businesses hurt by that. And then additionally, they would be working at other businesses if they weren't slaves. The fact that they are slaves kind of implies that they would otherwise not want to work at wherever they're currently working at. And those businesses are hurt by their inability to hire the labor that they need to produce their products.
Yeah, but in terms of the aspect, like, you're trying to focus on like consumption, whatever, but like there's many areas, even in the world today, where like slavery is still a thing. And when you look at from the greedy capitalist with the, like Scrooge McDuck, like swimming through the gold and all that stuff, the one thing that they would want put back in place is this whole aspect of slavery, correct?
I don't, so there might be like some capitalists whose individual interest is in that, but I don't believe holistically.
No, what I'm saying is like take on that kind of caricature of like I said, that rich, filthy capitalist that just wants to steal your labor, all this kind of stuff. Like, essentially slavery would be the most optimal tool for them, correct?
So if I am Jeff Bezos, it could be in my interest to have Amazon workers be slaves and not be paid for their labor, right? But like, I think there's an argument to make that like economic production overall, when considering, the entire economy's income, not just the income of one person, that would go up in per capita income per person would go up. Growth rates of poverty also go up. The rate at which income is growing would go up for everyone overall if we didn't have slavery, because you would see a more efficient allocation of labor. You would see more consumption. You would see just a better allocation of resources. You probably see more innovation too, like slaves, presumably. Isn't there like there's a quote from someone that's like, like how many Einsteins like died in a field being a slave or whatever. Like, if you name up people who, have ideas and everything, to create ideas and be entrepreneurs and sell that to other people, that's going to increase the growth rate of a country. Obviously, slaves are typically prevented from doing that. That's going to harm the economy as well.
So one second, I think I'm having audio issues on my side as well. But like the main premise I'm just trying to get at here is that, like, in terms of like that like the Satan character or the evil character, so he's an evil character essentially. Like that whole aspect, like you would agree that they would want something like slavery to come back, correct?
So like I said, I would just separate like the individual from the aggregate. So I agree. Like, evil, greedy capitalist Jeff Bezos would be in his interest. Sure, I agree to have some Amazon or Amazon workers be slaves, not be paid for their labor, at least in the short term. But overall, like when considering everyone's income, or even everyone's income but the slaves, just even saying exclude the slaves, right? Like you would see higher overall income and or GDP. I mean, GDP is equal to income, but GDP growth if you had wage labor, free labor instead of slave labor.
Yeah, but it just from the cost perspective, it's lower for them, correct?
Yeah, so everything involves trade-offs, right? So I agree the cost of labor, would be lower under a slave society. It's just that's going to have other costs elsewhere. For example, the more limited consumption that slaves would have, and the more
when you look at like the current day America, the fact that it's such a consumer-based market, all this stuff, you could still, let's say, import in all this labor from other countries, designate them as slaves, and you still have the same amount of consumption. You see what I'm saying?
Not necessarily. So you might have the same amount of consumption that we have now. I don't know if you would necessarily, actually, but you wouldn't have as much consumption as a counterfactual as if the people you had imported were not slaves, right? The fact that they are slaves almost intrinsically is going to reduce their consumption.
Yeah, reduce their consumption, but even from a perspective of the business and from the economy, you don't have any of that cost anymore.
So again, it's about essentially trade-offs. So like most systems are going to have winners and losers to some extent. It's just a question of what system has the most overall winners and the least overall losers. And I think slavery would have more losers than winners considering the fact, like I said, there are other businesses whose products would be consumed by slaves if the slaves were not slaves, and there are other businesses who would hire the slaves if the slaves were not slaves. And those are sectors that are hurt.
Are you social? Are you in favor of socialism, or are you against socialism?
I'm against socialism. So if you're an anarcho-capitalist, you might call me a socialist. I don't know. Do you think Kamala Harris is a socialist?
Yeah, I'd classify as a socialist.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe you would brand me as a socialist. Then I don't think. There's areas.
Let me ask it this way: do you think that we should seize the means of production?
No.
Okay, so then, like, why would you associate yourself with someone like Kamala Harris who has that point of view?
Well, so I don't believe she has that point of view, and we can come back to that. I do want to come back to that because it is relevant to what I want to talk about. But I would like an answer to just like you do like fundamentally agree that there are sectors of the economy, or there are other people who would be hurt by slavery being a thing, even if certain business owners were helped as well.
The individual slaves, of course.
Well, even outside of the individual slaves,
the actual,
like you would acknowledge, for example, the things I've mentioned, like there are other businesses whose products would be consumed if it weren't for the slaves being slaves. Like if I sell chocolate bars, there are not many slaves buying chocolate bars. So in a system with slavery, my chocolate bar business is going to do worse than in a system without slavery, because if there's no slavery, presumably some of those slaves are going to be able to buy chocolate bars.
Yeah, so like the aspect I'd paint towards there would be the less funds the masses are consuming would still be put towards research and development, progress, technological advancement, all this kind of stuff. So in terms of like the economy's big picture, I don't think you can say one way or the other purely from the aspect of, or from the financial aspect, because you're talking about kind of like more resources being allocated towards development and all that kind of stuff. So like in terms, but that's what I'm trying to make clear in terms of the whole moral imperative here. We both agree that like slavery, introducing slavery into the economy would be morally bad, correct?
Well, so yes, but I believe that because I think the outcomes from slavery are bad. So.
Yeah, but yeah, again, like the only reason why we're clarifying this is because from the aspect of like the whole like number point of view, it's sometimes like it could be a better number for the economy. That does not necessarily mean that it's like, more for the economy. Right.
I agree. Like there are obviously like cases where I would rather have like a lower GDP, but some other factor be increased because that other factor matters more than GDP if it increases human happiness more or whatever. Although I do think GDP like heavily correlates with like almost any measure of human happiness or like human development that you can come up with. But regardless, my fundamental point there is simply that I don't have reason to believe that overall the economy would be more allocatively efficient or grow as fast if slaves, slavery was still a big sustained institution, right? I really do want to answer to the question that I asked earlier that I did not get a clear answer to before we went on this tangent.
Yeah, sorry. Like I said, I've finally got the audio fixed now, so full attention.
Okay. So, like I do, before we went on a tangent, I do like I want to answer a more clear answer to this question. I really don't feel like I got an answer to it. If it let's just say like it was the case that like the U.S. could have prevented a Holocaust for 0.8% of GDP. Would that have been a good thing to do?
Yes, of course.
Why would that have been a good thing to do?
But can I just ask a quick clarification? And again, I'm sorry that you're trying to put me back and all that stuff. But just like, can I ask your opinion? What do you think the like when we mention like the Holocaust, it's a very serious issue. But like, what in your opinion was the inhumanity from the Holocaust?
The inhumanity from the Holocaust.
Like the aspect that they just went after Jays. And like that's a bad thing, and we shouldn't go after that. Is that like what? Maybe
I think the bad thing is that they killed millions of people. Most of them, maybe not most nominally, but a lot of them on the basis of being a Jew, but more generally just being on the basis of not being part of the master race or whatever, right? Or being a dissident against the Nazi Party. I think it was bad that they tortured, did forced labor and killed millions of people. because human suffering
the
is
main
bad.
thing for me, because you hear this particularly across the right wing, but it's also like on the left wing and all this kind of shit. Oh, 6 million, it wasn't 6 million, all this kind of shit. Like, to me, that's irrelevant, because the experimentation alone with those doctors done in those camps, like that to me was atrocious, because the main goal of what they wanted to do was to be able to break your mind and control your behavior. Because the solution to war is, if I can control your behavior, I don't need to fight you, I control you. You know what I mean? So it's like that's the whole aspect in terms of like preventing the Holocaust, all this kind of shit. That to me is the critical thing with the Holocaust. But I understand with the numbers and all this kind of stuff, when we look to, you know, Mao China or like Stalin Russia, a lot of lives lost in terms of those ideologies too. But to get to the crux of it, yes, like if it's like 1% of the GDP to prevent this thing, then I'd be all in favor of it. But so I mean, my whole kind of like outlook on it, we're still doing that today, unfortunately.
So if you kind of accept the general principle that like it'd be good to spend a very small amount of our budget to save millions of lives, even if those millions of lives are overseas, then it seems like you should also believe that, you know, USAID, at least on the whole, was a good program, because USAID was about 0.8% of the US's budget, and it helped saved millions of people's lives overseas. If you look at like all the estimates, like all of them are saying, you know, the USAID cuts are probably, you know, going to kill 1 million or more people a year overseas. That's a pretty horrible, heinously immoral thing to do, in my opinion. You're muted on Discord. Sorry.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I told you it's a meme. So like, just to do the trolley problem real quick, then would you say, okay, you're standing at the trolley, you know the trolley problem, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you either, the train's going to hit like an innocent, like, you know, teenage girl, she's not done anything wrong in her life, or 1 million PDFs. Would you press the button or not?
So I mean, wait, sorry, repeat the hypothetical.
Like the train
One
is
innocent
heading towards this innocent, like, you know, like small little girl. But if you press the button, 1 million PDFs are going to die. Would you press the button or not press the button?
I probably would have pressed the button, but I probably would not press the button a million. I mean, that's bad. But so we can run through the reductios. So I mean, we can run through the reductios.
The reason, I'll explain the rationale.
But I just want to be clear. Like you already accepted the principle that it is good to save millions of lives for a very small percentage point of the U.S.'s budget, right? Now that is a conclusion that is a conclusion. Well, you said it would be good to prevent the Holocaust for a very small percentage of the U.S. budget or whatever. So, but you know, so the only thing that's necessary for my argument is you accepting that general principle, right? So you can arrive at that principle. You can arrive at that conclusion from like a utilitarian foundation, at which point maybe you would entail some trolley problem things that you find unintuitive, but you can arrive at that conclusion, you know, from any, or from, you know, presumably some that would not allow it, but almost like any philosophy, right? So like, so long as you accept the principle that it is good to save millions of lives for a very small percent of the U.S. budget, you should believe that USAID was an overall net positive.
No, and that's why I gave the example of the PDFs. But I mean, like, for example, there are plenty of Muslims in the Middle East that want to wipe out all the Jays, all the shit. Now, if you're telling me it's like, oh, like they've gone to war and like Israel's like wiping these people out, I'm not losing a wink of sleep. You know what I mean? So like, just by putting a high number on it, like if these people are genuinely will cause more harm if they were to live than not, then I don't see how you can justify. I mean, for example, like a mass murderer, that if you don't press the button, they will kill more people versus an innocent child. I'm pressing that button and killing the mass murderer. I don't give a fuck.
So I mean, well, if so, for one, like if you, I don't even want to entertain this, but like if you know, or this is not necessary for my argument, so I don't know how much it's worth discussing, but if you just presuppose that like these people would cause more harm than good or whatever, then so personally, like I would be committed to saying like whatever does the least amount of harm, you know, is good or whatever, right? So like if you just say these million PDF files are going to do is an insane amount of harm in society, well then I would kill them, right? It'd be a good thing to kill them, but it'd be a good thing to kill them regardless of the innocent girl on the other track, right? Like, you know, I would kill them just because it would be good to kill them if they did a fuck ton of harm to society.
Because like the reason and again, I'm not trying to do like some wiggling out and all stuff, like because I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. Where when you're kind of saying you prevent the Holocaust for like 1% GDP, and I'm like, yes, because like in terms of the broad spectrum of people, it's like the only reason why they were attacked was because they were Jays. Whereas in the broad spectrum, to say you will save 1 million lives no matter who they are, it's like, no, if they're mass murderers, if they're criminals, all this kind of stuff, it's like,
right. But then, so we, like the position I guess you would have to hold then is that the people we're saving with USAID were essentially like net negatives. Like we're so certain that they were a net negative that it was not worth saving their lives.
Like, I've done the presupposition, and again, you're correct to call it out, where it's like, yeah, like these PDF files will hurt other people, or these mass murders will go out and kill people. That's the same kind of like counter narrative. Like, if you're presupposing that these people are good people and like we need to save them, but like you could just be enabling, or could be like a lot of, particularly in the Middle East, where there's a lot of like anti-Western sentiment, your base is facilitating people to take you out one day. You know what I'm saying? That's why with all murder,
so I mean,
if they were going to kill someone else, it'd be more moral to kill them.
Mm-hmm. But so for one thing, like I would say like we should at best be, you know, uncertain as if these people are like net positive. Now I would argue they obviously are net positive, like almost certainly so. But like let's just say, you know, like they, you know, we don't know for like there's a 51% chance of them living net positive lives and a 49% chance of them living like net negative lives or whatever. You know, like I would still hold that even though there's uncertainty there, like we should save them. And I think like because, you know, the consequence of being wrong is killing a fuck ton of people that live net positive lives. That's just like a very bad, heinously immoral thing to do. But I think really your credence that they live net positive lives should be much higher than 51%. I think like it's very unlikely to me that, you know, the people in South Africa that we were, you know, saving, right? The people in Nigeria that we were saving were like net negatives on the world, right? Like they're human beings, like they presumably live decently happy lives, right? Like it seems absurd to argue that because they might have like some anti-West sentiment sometimes, some of them, like that's going to holistically cause them to be a net negative on the world, especially when, you know, most of the people we're saving like never come here or anything. So we shouldn't really have to worry about it that much.
Yeah, because and here's the thing is that just because someone's in a weaker position doesn't inherently mean that they're morally good, correct?
I agree.
Yeah, so just because someone is incapable of robbing my business doesn't mean that they're morally good. It just means that they're financially incapable of getting the tools together and doing the whole heist job kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah,
what I'm saying,
none of that.
It's like you're presupposing that these people, firstly, like are morally good agents, and then secondly as well that like this is going to be end up as some intrinsic good.
Like I just gave my reasons for believing that they are net positive, right? I said like, you know, we like. It doesn't seem like any of this anti-West sentiment is like particularly affecting us. Like certainly like the lives we've saved, like, you know, with USAID or whatever, you know, let's say like half of the people we saved have some amount of anti-West sentiment. Like how much does that really affect us if 90% of the people just remain in Nigeria, remain in Africa anyway? It does not seem like that has any big effect. And it seems rather insane to argue that the effect would be so big that it'd be like worth killing them for.
Well,
that seems
this way,
very.
Right? 3% of the British population at the moment is Pakistani Muslim, right? But that they are responsible for 60% of the grape that's currently happening. So if you're to say that you're a feminist, but you support like the open border, the immigration, supporting these people coming in, you're necessarily saying that you're accepting more rape and sexual assault.
None of that,
correct?
Is at all necessary for my argument. So look. So again, like you accepted this principle, and like I understand. So
to explain why we got here, because again, like I said, this is going to be one of those where I just get clipped out of context, all the kind of stuff. What you're asserting or presupposing is that these people are morally good and ergo they deserve our help. What I'm pointing towards when you see these people when they come into particularly Europe, like there's no there's the presupposition of them being morally good is a weakness. They use that to exploit.
For one, I'm not presupposing it, right? If we have a factual disagreement about whether they're net good, like I think I've given my reasons to believe that they are a net good or whatever. But also, like so for example, like the thing you cited there or whatever, like assuming that's true, I'm skeptical of that, but I don't know the UK statistics, all right? Like assuming that's true, you know, what you would have to argue is that like USAID is going to cause so much of these negative effects as to make it not worth it to save millions of lives. And I don't think there's any coherent argument that it's the case when very few of the people we save with USAID like ever come here in the first place. And presumably they're going to have other just generally positive effects, right? They're going to have relationships with people in their home country that are positive.
That's the keyword, assuming. But like, you're assuming that these people they want Western culture. Like, you're saying assuming that they
no, I said
Western
assuming
culture,
the statistic that assuming that the statistic that you gave me is true, because I don't know it to be true. Then what you would have to argue is that USAID is going to cause so much of that type of harm that it is not worth saving millions of lives, because the harm, done by that type of thing would outweigh it. And that seems highly, highly implausible to me.
Yeah, so I sent you a link there of like the current grape stats compared to like 25 years ago in England. I'm trying to find the actual, because there was an actual thing that came out for that in terms of the actual like 3%, but 60% of it. What I'm pointing out to is like there's a lot of cultures that like nothing would be like nothing would make them happier than seeing the downfall of the West. Despite the fact that like feminism is part of the West, all this kind of stuff, they will literally erode all this stuff. Like when you look at Sharia law and compare that to feminism, they're fundamentally incompatible. And there's plenty of people who come over here and they say we want Sharia law.
You think the effect of the like anti-West sentiment that's within these countries, right? Not many of these people that were saved with USAID again are like coming to the US and spreading anti-West sentiment in a way that's going to like directly harm us. That effect is so big as it outweighs the impact of killing millions of people.
But we're not killing them.
Again,
that's the counter narrative. It's like if we don't help them, we're directly killing them. That's, again, you're kind of presupposing moral agency on our side.
No. So I think it could hold. So if you want to say there's a difference between, well, for one, I would just say like in this case, it doesn't seem particularly that there is a big difference between sort of an act of omission versus an act of commission, right? If you unilaterally withdraw aid very suddenly in very poor, desperate areas where people simply lack the resources to get any of these things on themselves in any reasonable time span, I would say in effect you've killed them. That is not very different to me than dropping a bomb on them, right? I don't view a big difference between that act of omission from an act of commission. But like let's just say like there is a relevant difference between omission and commission. I still don't I don't think that's defeats my argument at all. Again, I would like a clear answer. Like you believe the harm from any of these anti-West sentiment is like so damaging as to outweigh the effects of even an act of omission in causing millions of people to die.
Well, yeah, like just look at you can just look at London. Look at what's happening in England at the moment.
That's because
it's this whole thing of like the anti-Western attitude and stuff. But like, let's not forget October the 8th, the day after the October 7th attacks happened. They were all out and marching. They're all saying it's like, yeah, like we need to stop Israel, all this kind of shit. But if you were to say, right, we're just going to focus on America and we're going to take a step back from the Middle East. Let's say Israel goes on a rampage, converts the Middle East back into the Greco-Persian Empire. I wouldn't say that Americans are at fault because of the lives lost to do that. You know what I mean? What I'm trying to point out is that you seem to be going down this avenue, but just because these people are suffering, that automatically means that it's on Western people to help. But I don't see the
so I don't think it automatically means that we have an obligation to help. I think you could just appeal to a much more modest principle, which is that if you can reduce a lot of suffering at very low cost, that is a good thing to do, which is a principle that you have generally accepted with the Holocaust example. You're just simply disputing that we are actually reducing a large amount of suffering at very low cost, because you're saying, actually, if we save the lives of these people, they're going to spread enough anti-West sentiment so as to outweigh the positive of saving their life. Like,
yeah, because again, if we try to do the general thing of like, oh, you would save the Holocaust people, that means you have to save these jihadis terrorists. It's like, no, that's not the same thing at all. But I mean, it depends on the actual people themselves. And when you look at a lot of these people, like they're very anti-West. They chant death to Israel, death to America, death to the West. You know what I mean?
Okay, how many?
Anytime we say this is what they actually believe, like given the opportunity, they would, like, you're kafir, you're non-Muslim. You know what I mean? They do not like you. They want to see you eradicated. You know what I mean? And when we bring that up, it's like, oh well, like what harm could that actually do? Well, tell that to the English girls that were raped. You know what I mean? That were groomed and raped.
I think there is
decades.
Incredibly little tangible harm that, even if I accept that, like, you know, most of this like stuff is true, right? For, you know, for example, about like immigrants or, you know, refugees, once they're in Western countries spreading anti-Western sentiment, I think there's very little tangible harm that the lives we've saved in third world countries have done to the West.
Yeah, again, like I don't know what your premise is based on in there. You're kind of saying, well, these people are poor, and then it seems like you're equating them to being like morally good because they're poor. And like I'm trying to point out, just because someone's in a weaker position, you does not mean that you just presuppose they're the good guys. You know
I've already so I've given you like the reasons I think it's unlikely that they like.
Yeah, so but like your whole thing is like what would constitute harm and all stuff. And I sent you a link there, like the grape statistics. And again, like
I've already.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you understand it. So I've already said just assume that's true, right? Like I'll just assume that is true. You would have to provide a very clear mechanism by which the funding they went to USAID that saved the lives of people in like South Africa, not even like a lot of these, like, you know, a lot of people in Ethiopia. Not even these most like these Muslim immigrants you're talking about, although they do have programs, you know, saving people in the Middle East, obviously. But like that causes so much harm to the West via immigration, via all the rape that immigrants supposedly do once they're here, as to outweigh the benefit of saving millions of other people's lives. And I don't think there's a very coherent argument for that. And none of that is based on someone
like
being.
I said, like the funding, for example, like Hamas or Hezbollah, like a lot of this funding just facilitates their quote unquote war plans. You know what I mean? And like I keep pointing out, it's like even when you try to welcome these people in and try to integrate them into society, you have grape statistics doubling, tripling. You know what I mean? And it's like my whole counter to that is that like how can you stand and justify increasing the grapes that have gone up in just like 24 years? Like your whole main premise is like, what's the worst that could happen if we were to like let this ideology or let these people run rampant? And I'm showing you, like, when you look at like the crime statistics, everything is going up purely for the sake of
like
more
really
more grandization kind of thing, you know?
Not attempting to understand me. So I don't think there's a feasible mechanism by which the people's lives who were saved by USAID could do tangible harm to the U.S. Like, I don't think that there's a good mechanism there, considering most of these people are staying in their home country. You know, once lives are saved by USAID, it does not seem like.
I'm asking, like how is this, for example, like, because basically what you're saying is that if I met a homeless dude on the street and every day I tossed him, you know, enough for lunch, right? And then like the next week I don't have any cash or whatever, and I'm like, I don't have any money, whatever. And then next week he dies because we didn't get any lunch or whatever. Like, I didn't kill him. You understand that, correct?
I didn't. We already talked about this.
Yeah. So you're saying like this USAID is saving. Yeah, you're saying that this USAID is saving millions of lives, but like those millions of lives are not my moral responsibility.
No. So you can believe that, and like you know, I might have some disagreement there, but like you don't have to accept that like you have a obligation to do this, right? Like you don't have like know, some intrinsic moral responsibility to do it. All you have to accept is the principle that, generally speaking, like absent other like side constraints being violated or whatever, it is a good thing to reduce a large amount of suffering, a large amount of human suffering at very low cost. And insofar as USAID was effective in reducing a large amount of human suffering at very low cost, then USAID would be a good program.
Not necessarily. That's why I keep pointing towards, like, these people that you're quote unquote trying to save, they could actually be morally bad agents, correct?
I agree there's above 0% chance of that happening, but you would have to prove that they are, one, so morally bad as to like outweigh the effects of like saving their lives, right? Like it could be like, you know, saving someone's life just generally is really good because people generally have, you know, positive effects on like other people as well, and you know they generally live happy lives themselves too. And presumably, even if there are like let's just say I grant that like some people, and I don't think this is really true, like some people whose lives were saved by USAID eventually moved to London and then eventually like raped someone or whatever, like that would have that effect would have that's the size of that effect would have to be so bad as to outweigh saving the lives of the 90 other million people that USAID saved.
Yeah, so again, like I said, you're saying like it's small spending, and then when I gave the example of transgender and all stuff, it's like there's clear examples of like what would be waste at least in terms of this. But again, like I said, the more presupposition to these people, like you're saying these are morally good people. You know what I mean? So we should save them. But what I'm saying is like you have failed to demonstrate that.
Okay, I feel like you've not engaged with most of the stuff I've said on that, which is, again, there doesn't seem to be a clear mechanism to me by which, even if they did have as harmful as beliefs as you're stating, that would tangibly harm Western countries in such a broad way as to outdo the goods of saving the other people who may not have these, you know, negative beliefs. Because presumably not everyone saved by USAID has these negative beliefs.
Yeah, so we can't pull up the footage, but if you want to, like, if you want me to send you on the links on stuff afterwards, I will do. Like
I think
the whole October 7th, the whole October 7th massacre and all the shit. Like the vast majority of Gazans view that as freedom fighting. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I like, again, I would need tangible evidence. Like you need to draw a very clear connection between USAID and saving millions of lives to the October 7th massacres, and then not only that, but you have to say, you know, like the cost of the October 7th massacres were so bad that it is not worth saving the other 90 million lives that USAID saved over its existence.
Yeah, so I can point to this group of people and their ideology and say, this is what this militia group done, and 90% or more of the Gazans not only support that, but will vote someone in. Like next time, if they do this two-state solution, they'll vote basically the exact same party in and do it again. Should we save those people?
So if you're going to presuppose that like it's a net harm, then no. I would not
I'm just telling you
save
what their ideology is.
I'm not
presupposing. I'm just telling you what happened.
Sure. So it's not necessarily clear to me that would be a net harm, but it's conceivable.
You don't think, like, for example, if like put yourself in the position of an Israeli, you're saying like, no, give them the two-state solution, let them put Sharia law back in place, even though they're cheering this on. They're saying that this was freedom fighting, this rape and murder and decapitation, all this shit that they were doing, that was freedom fighting. You would trust that people as an Israeli?
No, I'm not saying no. I wouldn't trust those people as an Israeli. I don't trust those people currently. I'm not Israeli, but like obviously there's a cost.
So why should we save these people?
There's a human cost on the other side too, right? Like, you know, which is the Gazan like population in this hypothetical, and like I do believe, you know, their lives have, like, even if they have bad beliefs, like their lives still have like some at least some of their lives are still going to be net positive impact in the world, and they're still going to have like positive value insofar as their like lives are good. And I would not want to make their lives worse by not helping them in some cases.
If these were mass murderers or genociders or PDF files or whatever, like we wouldn't say it's like, oh, so long as they live a good and happy life, then we should save them. It's like, no, these people are evil.
So that's not what I'm. So I like. Some I agree with that as like a general principle. What I'm simply saying is that, like, you know, it's likely that like even even people who might have like some negative beliefs, like that do some you know, I'll just grant they do some tangible harm to society. It seems likely that like a lot of the people in Gaza like have some like at least before October 7th, or at least before the war got really bad for the general Gazan population, like had some like tacit support for Hamas, and like that probably did have a tangible harm in society, right? But I don't think like a tacit support for Hamas like necessarily equates to you having a net negative impact on the world overall, because, you know, whatever harm, like your tacit support for Hamas is not going to be essentially the deciding factor in whether or not Hamas commits a massacre or anything. And then
so, like,
that person also is just generally going to have a positive life on their own, and generally is going to have a positive impact on their family and their friends.
Yeah, so like if we're to go back to 1940s Germany, and it's like there were like these Yazis there, they 100% believe in the Reich, they're talking about master race, all this stuff. Like, should we save those people?
I don't believe that you should kill the majority of the German population unless you're going to presuppose.
No. Again, like you're putting in this whole thing of like we have to save them, and if we don't save them, we are the murderers. What I'm saying is the exact same situation.
So I don't think.
Germany, should we go out of our way to help these Yazis?
I mean, okay. So if you're going to, like, this example, like, is it up to me to decide, like, whether or not, like, saving the lives of the Yazis or whatever, you know, would prevent the Holocaust? Because, like, presumably, at some margin, like, that trade-off might be worth it, but, like, I don't believe that in most cases the lives of, you know, people living under the German Reich were so negative such that killing, like, not, or I mean, I say killing them, but not helping them live, right, would be like a net positive.
Yeah, like this is what I'm trying to point out. This whole thing of like, just because I'd help the Jays or the prevent the Holocaust does not necessarily mean that applies to every single group. There could be Yazis, there could be Hamas, there could be Hezbollah, there could be a lot of nefarious actors in this. You know what I mean?
Right, but I think most of the people,
because like
you right, yeah, but so the argument is not just like don't help Hamas. The argument is that don't help innocent people in sub-Saharan Africa because they have like anti-Western beliefs in some cases.
No, what I'm trying to point towards is like the moral presupposition that it's like these people are innocent.
I really don't think
all
I'm
this kind of stuff.
Presupposing.
What I'm trying to point towards is there's a lot of nefarious characters in and around that world that do not like the West, but they'll accept all the aid and all the benefits and all this kind of stuff. But essentially, all they want to do is weaponize that against you. You know what I mean? That a lot of this funding, the UN funding, all the stuff, like it just ended up in the banks of like the leaders of Hamas, and they're all hiding down in Qatar.
How much USAID funding do you think ended up in the hands of Hamas? Please tell me what percent of USAID funding ended up in the hands of Hamas?
It's at this stage, it's probably too difficult to actually give a rough estimate. But I point towards, for example, like the transgender musical play in Ireland. I point towards
was that used to funnel money to Hamas? Is Hamas a big fan of transgender plays too?
But this is not exactly saving lives. You know what I mean?
No, I agree. Not everything.
Musical in Ireland is not. You know what I mean?
I agree. Not everything USAID did saved lives. I think the majority of what USAID did was good, though. It saved a lot of lives. You know, the programs that USAID had were very.
That they're saving lives.
That's not an assumption.
Those lives are even worth saving.
So that's not an assumption. That's based on evidence I've seen. Like, you know, based on, I mean, I believe there's multiple different medical journals who have estimates on essentially how many lives were saved by the efforts of USAID over its existence. And then there are a few other estimates by other people about how many lives will be lost because of the cuts to USAID. So I don't think that's just like
it's just estimations.
So obviously, we're not going to know ever for sure the exact number of lives saved by USAID. But by utilizing natural experiments, by observing what happens when, you know, a USAID hospital opens up in, you know, an African country, we can make pretty reasonable conclusions about roughly how many lives these programs were saving. So it's not an unfounded assumption to say, you know, USAID probably saved roughly 90 million lives over its existence. Yeah,
but like what I'm trying to point towards is that those lives, you don't know whether or not they were actually worth saving. I can give another example of like Pompeii. You know, like the people who like built all the villages around the volcano and then exploded and they all got incinerated to life or incinerated to death. Again, like it's not anyone else's fault that they didn't stop the like what would have been almost impossible. Like they didn't save the Pompeii people. It's like you have to look at yourself and say, well, you did build on the side of a volcano. Tough shit, Paddy. You know what I mean?
Okay, man. Look, I feel like you're not. Maybe I'm speaking fast to you or something. I feel like you're not seriously engaging with the stuff I've said about
your main premise.
Positive and negative lives. But
if we don't do the USA thing, people will die. And from that, you're saying that we are the murderers because we didn't help. And they
no. I don't think you have to hold. No, you don't. So you don't have to hold that. You know, we're murderers, right? I feel like again, I've ran through this a few different times now, which is why we should move on at some point. But all you have to hold is that it is good to reduce large amounts of suffering at relatively low cost. And then, from that, it follows that insofar as USA did that, it would be a good program. You don't have to hold that we'd be murderers if we didn't do it. Like you can do good things.
Like if we canceled this USAID, it's not like we're killing these people, correct?
Well, so I would hold that position, but you don't have to hold that position for my general argument to hold, which is that USAID was really good and it's bad to get rid of it because it kills millions of people. Well, I use the word kill, sorry, but it would be bad to get rid of it.
Yeah, but again, like I'm looking for you to like justify why I should care about some village in Africa, whether or not
because I think
that village survives.
Okay, so if the new argument is just going to be that like suffering in African villages just like doesn't matter. For one, I think that's something that's at least some people.
I'm asking you, like, why should I care as like either an Irishman or as an American or whatever? Why should I care what happens over there?
Okay. You should care because I don't think there's a relevant distinction between the suffering of people in Africa and the suffering of people in America that makes one like more morally valuable than the other necessarily. But even if like you hold that, suffering in America just for some reason is more valuable to prevent than suffering in Africa, additionally, money just goes a lot further in Africa. You can save a lot more lives per dollar in Africa than you can save in developed countries, because developed countries already have a lot more resources at the general populace's disposal. So even if you hold that like we should care more about Americans, we should care more about Irishmen or whatever, it can still be really good to help out third world countries, and at least to some minimum extent it'd be good to reduce the suffering of them at really low cost.
Yeah, and again, like I said, the whole aspect though is like why should I care whether or not the African village is succeeds or fails? Because if we were back in like, we can go to like ancient Greece as well, like multiple examples throughout this where it's like they themselves like did not have the technology at the time, but this suffering was still happening in Africa. You know what I mean? Well, should we hold the ancient Greeks like morally responsible for not helping out other surrounding tribes or whatever? No, that'd be ridiculous.
So for two things. One, an obligation implies you can do it, right? So like if they couldn't do it, then they obviously have no obligation to do it because they literally can't. But secondly, again, it feels like I'm repeating myself here. You don't have to hold that this is an obligation to do. All you have to believe is that it would be it is good to reduce large amounts of suffering at relatively low cost. And insofar as USAID did that, it'd be a good program. Even if it's not obligatory.
Like, what you're saying is that it's morally good to do this, and I'm asking you, why is it morally good to do this?
Because I think suffering is bad, and so typically so like my personal reason, I think suffering is bad, right? Like that's the thing I intrinsically care about. I think, and I think insofar as you can prevent suffering at very low cost, that's just a really good thing to do. But you can you only have to hold like a much more modest premise to accept this, and essentially anyone is going to accept it, which is why like you have told me like you would think it is good to prevent the Holocaust if it only costs like 0.8% in GDP.
Yeah, but like what I'm trying to get at is like you're saying it's good to do this, but I'm asking why. I mean, and you're saying, well, you said in this one scenario, it's like, yeah, in this one scenario, like from my individual.
Okay, so I'm doing two different.
Where I kind of like make the decision.
Okay, so to be clear, I'm doing two different. So I am I do want to explain like my like personal reasons, like my my personal philosophy, right? Like and that is like, so I'm a utilitarian. Like I want to maximize total utility, and I believe that USAID did that. But utilitarianism is a much more controversial premise than whatever your well, actually I don't know if it's more controversial than whatever your philosophy is, but like you don't have to accept utilitarianism to find my more modest argument based on more modest premises convincing, which is simply that insofar as you hold that the suffering of people in foreign countries has above zero value, even if it's not equal to American suffering or whatever, and insofar as foreign aid or USAID reduce the suffering of foreign people at low cost, it would be good, not necessarily obligatory, but at least good to do so.
Yes, but why?
I don't think you're seriously engaging with
No,
what I
I'm
just said.
genuinely saying,
So,
like, why do you view that as a moral good?
Okay, so to repeat myself, the reason I view it as a moral good, as a utilitarian, is because I want to maximize total utility. Now, that's built on very controversial premises. All right.
Yeah, but like I said, to get on top of that, like, why do you view utilitarianism as like a moral good or as an ought?
I believe, well, for one, okay. So I do want to be clear here. Again, in order for my argument to hold, you don't have to accept any of these utilitarian talking points I'm about to spit out. Okay, all you have to do is believe that foreign suffering has above zero value, and insofar as USAID reduces the suffering of foreign people at low cost, it would be a good program, not necessarily obligatory to do. So if you're asking my personal reasons for utilitarianism, right? Like, I don't debate philosophy a lot, but I think our like proper moral system should be essentially an impartial moral system. So I think one way you could we could imagine being impartial is if you imagined essentially that you at one point in time would live the life of every sentient being that existed, right? And it's clear to me that if you lived the life of every sentient being that existed, if you wanted to maximize the like total amount of happiness in your life, right? Which typically that's what people are aiming for, or whatever you want to maximize in your life, right? Like the actions you would take if you had to live the life for everyone would be utilitarian actions. So I think that it gives me, good. I think that's a decent.
Yeah, but a counterexample is like your whole thing of like to reduce foreign suffering. Like that's a greater than zero value. But if the whole rest of the world were like Yahtzees, PDFs, like the worst humans imaginable, like you wouldn't. I don't think you would argue that like it's more utility to save these people than to not.
No, I wouldn't hold that. And I feel like repeating myself again. So if you shift back to the argument of just like you're disputing that like it is utility maximizing to save these people because it might have been good to save the Jews from the Holocaust because they apparently are net positives, but people dying right now in Africa are net negatives.
Yeah, I can justify that.
So
like,
I mean,
example,
your justifications have been very, very poor so far, and I feel like you've not addressed any of my issues.
when you look at the specific case of the Holocaust or the Jewish population in general, when you look at like for example Nobel prizes or scientific achievements, like they're vastly overrepresented, and ironically enough, on the right wing, this is my whole back and forth. The right wing, I go to the same people that say, yeah, blacks are 15% of the population, but they're 50% of the murder. And I hit them with the Jews, like, yeah, they're only like 1% of the population, but they're vastly overrepresented in all these fields. Oh, that's because they control the world. But like that, like I said, I'm not like in terms of that dynamic. But what I'm pointing towards in terms of the Holocaust itself, like you can look at the Jewish people, you can look at their average IQ, you can look at the contributions that they've done to society, and say these clearly they're a benefit to the society rather than a net negative. Whereas you can go to certain populations like Pakistani men, for example, where they view like a kafir, which is a non-Muslim, raping a non-Muslim is not only like not seen as a negative, that's actually seen as a moral good to them. You know what I mean? So when you say it's like, oh, there's a lot of these people that are suffering, like my whole counter argument is like, yeah, but these people could be suffering justifiably. You know what I mean? Like if these people were Yahtzees, I'm pretty sure you would agree, like, yeah, they deserve to suffer. They are horrible human beings, etc., etc. So the reason why, and again, I'm not trying to snake around. I'm just trying to get to what is your core. But it seems like utilitarianism is just the main thing. But when I say
no, because again, I don't know how many
tyranny majority.
I don't know how many times I've explained that, like, well, I am a utilitarian. You only have to accept much more modest premises that essentially any moral philosophy is going to accept to believe that USAID was a good program overall. Look, like we've gone back and forth like 100 times, man. I've given my reasons for saying I don't think that people dying in Africa are net negatives for the world. I don't think there's any clear mechanism by which they substantially harm the West. So I would like to, if we want to talk about why Kamala Harris was apparently a socialist and Trump.
It's your show. If you want to, whatever way you want to go, I'm more than happy. But I just want to take a quick piss break though. If you need to address that in the audience and all that stuff.
Okay, yeah, you can take a piss break, sure. Dude, am I like going crazy? Ask him if he even thinks that's true. You're not crazy? That was painful. Official Nonfon IQ estimate on this one. I don't think you're having a good time. I am... It's complicated. I have mixed feelings. You're talking past each other super hard. I just think he... I don't think he understands the point of the trolley. I don't think he understands the point of anything. I don't think he understands any of my arguments. Like I feel like I've repeated myself so many goddamn times, and then it feels like once he kind of finally gets the point I'm trying to make, he just shifts back to like another argument that I had to explain already 4 times. Nonfon, this guy thinks America is a Nazi nation. I swear to God, this guy is worse than I remembered. I thought he was a much more standard conservative from my interactions I had with him on Sarah's panels, but not talking past, he's literally tomato brain. Yeah, exactly. It feels like I'm like, he's like, okay, why do you like? He's like, there's like been 3 different things where it'll be like something along the lines of like, oh, like you hold that it's so good to save these foreign people or whatever, but you know that's could you explain like why or whatever? And I'm like, okay, so I will explain why, because I want to be like honest, like I want to explain like my personal beliefs and my philosophy here, but like to be clear, like,
oh, sorry about that.
You only have to accept these much more modest premises. Yeah, what's up?
So yeah, I think you want to go into Kamala or something like that.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to pick up a little bit where we left off on the economic side.
Yeah,
I guess. Okay, so you think essentially what I got from what you said. Correct me if I'm wrong. You think Kamala Harris's policy would have been worse on the economy because she was a socialist, while Trump is a nationalist, and even though Trump's might not be a ideal, it's at least like not socialism.
Well, no, I'd still make the case that our current economic system is socialist. But yeah, like the whole aspect to it, it's with the likes of Kamala with the, what was it, like 50 grand down payment on houses and shit like that. It's like, are you pulling it out of your arse? Like, how the fuck are you going to make that work? But it's just the general kind of like theme, it seems to be on the left wing, is that it's like, oh, if this is for a good moral cause, just increase the government spending. And the counter question is, if the government can just print more money, why are you paying taxes in the first place? You know what I mean?
Never considered that one before. Damn, that's deep. But no, so like, okay.
Got him, boys. Got him. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, believe it or not, I have read MMT before. Okay, but regardless, look, I like to some extent, I don't 100% disagree with you, because like I would consider myself like a neoliberal. Like I don't like all like Kamala's like economic policy, and I agree with you. The left is like too quick to go to like government as a solution to like any problem, and they're also not particularly concerned sometimes with how effective the government is at actually implementing the solutions. But for what I would say, I think Trump is not like particularly different there in actuality. Like we just saw, for example, Trump take stake in Intel, which is like that's obviously a relatively socialist thing to do, right? He sees a problem that the market is failing, supposedly, that we don't have chips produced in America, and he's taking stake in Intel to try to help help Intel achieve the goal of producing chips here or whatever. And I also just think that like most of the plans that Kamala Harris has that I think were bad, I don't think were as bad as most of Trump's policies, and I think they were unlikely to pass the Senate and the or the House in the first place. So like I don't know if the how the home credit for buying a home would have passed the Senate and House. It could, but that to me would be net bad, but would not have major destructive effects. Whilst Trump can impose tariffs unilaterally, and I think tariffs have already had like a lot of costs. Like, for example, I don't believe we would have seen a negative GDP in Q1 of this year if it wasn't for Trump and his tariff policy. Yeah,
but in Q2 it's up, isn't it? Or at least that's what I thought.
Yeah, but it's obviously still below trend, right? We should compare to trends,
yeah.
Well, the trend
think
fluctuated because of Trump's tariff policy.
Yeah, because it's what Q2 GDP grew 3%, beating expectations of 2.4. So it's like in terms of the
but you understand.
Year, I think it's still below trending, but it's go ahead.
Okay, so like you understand two things. One, like we should compare it to the counterfactual, like generally. So it is the case that like GDP grew, like we didn't have a contraction in Q2 of this year. I agree, GDP grew. But it doesn't mean that GDP wouldn't have grown by even more if we didn't have tariffs, right? So it could have been the case that if we didn't have any of these tariffs, if we didn't see Trump messing with the Federal Reserve, if we didn't see Trump messing with the BLS, if we didn't see Trump doing whatever shit he did to the with the fucking what's the name of it? Fuck, I'm gonna forget. Kill me. I'll remember in a second. God damn it. Fuck me. There was another thing I wanted to mention, but. Oh, doing with the big beautiful bill. Sorry. Okay, there we go. I got it eventually. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't have seen growth be high in Q2, but also, obviously, like, if you have GDP averaging 2 to 3% annualized growth every quarter, and then you have a quarter that's a contraction, that's actually negative 0.5% real GDP, but next quarter you get back to average, you're still like way below trend there, right? You just had average GDP growth or slightly above average. When last quarter was literally contraction, you would have to have like double the average GDP growth to make up for the contraction that you had earlier.
Yeah, no, like I said, in terms of the Q1, like job growth as well has slowed down. There's a risk of inflation, consumer confidence as well is that because that's what an uncertain market does. And then like obviously like from the tariffs themselves, like that obviously like you highlighted before, it's like this is just more taxes that the government's getting loaded on. But like I said, in terms of the whole kind of like tariffs themselves, you're gonna the whole kind of like volatility. Again, like I see this a lot with the whole Bitcoin. It's too volatile. It's too volatile. Yeah, but the volatility is actually a feature, not a bug. So in terms of like making money, there are people that will make money regardless of the climate, regardless of the economic climate. But in terms of what we're talking about here is like maybe a couple of percent of the inflation itself. Well, he's just negative 0.5, and then he's up 2 points or 3.1 now. But you're saying that you need to do like above 5, but in Q3 and Q4, especially because Christmas, more people are spending all this kind of stuff. You're going to see that those percentages increase. So far, like I said, in terms of like I said, the
you think we're going to get
that's like, clearly negative.
You think we're going to get
growth, but
5% GDP growth in Q3 or Q4?
Oh no, like don't get me wrong. Like I'm thinking about this on a 4-year time frame. So it's like the first couple of quarters you're going to expect it's going to be volatile, especially when you load on as much taxes as tariffs as he has. But in terms of the long run, that's what I'm going to be interested in more so, because when you look at especially the crypto market, like last time Trump was in office, everybody who was Bitcoin, they love Trump for that. So and like when we see the Nasdaq
crypto
breaking out new times.
The crypto market is like absolutely not helped by tariffs. So if we expect some industries to be harmed by tariffs, if we expect like consumer spending to be harmed by tariffs, and but the crypto industry to do really well, in the case where we didn't have tariffs, the crypto industry would still do really well, but we would also just see higher job growth and higher consumer spending generally. So the tariffs would still be like a net bad thing, even in the long run.
Not necessarily. If there is this whole thing of like to keep everyone off their feet, no one knows who's going to get a tariff next. And like I said, in terms of the like, if Trump's plan was to have these permanently in place, then it's like clearly that's not going to go down too well, boys. You know what I mean? In terms of
that is his plan. So like he has struck some quote unquote deals so far. Most of them are like not legally binding. They're like phase 1 agreements
but he hasn't been permanent on his position. Like the tariffs are constantly increasing, decreasing, increasing.
But you agree all those deals so far have left at least 10% tariffs up on the countries we struck deals with.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. So Trump's goal is to leave at least 10% tariffs up permanently. Or at least until
no, not necessarily.
he leaves office.
Not necessarily. Because again, like this is,
okay, so what
is the art of Trump, the art of the deal. You literally don't know what you're going to get with him. He's a wall cannon.
So do you think Trump
at some point, literally like next week, he just says, "Well, tariff war is over. We're all printing money. The printers go burr. I mean, lower the interest rates. Let's fucking let's have at it, boys. Do you know what I mean? And when you look at the Nasdaq, the Russell, and Bitcoin, even gold now, like all these markets are kind of converging in the same kind of like macro level that like they've done before 4 years previous to that, the whole Bitcoin 4-year cycle kind of thing. Stock market takes the exact same, it's like the same shape. It's not the same percentages, obviously. Well, yeah, like I said, even if you go back as far as 2016, I think Bitcoin's averaging, I think it's like something like 20-30% year on year APR. So it's like, in terms of the crypto market, they don't really give a fuck who's in office. I mean,
well, I mean, I don't know if that's true actually, because presumably a lot of, you know, chips and like graphics cards for Bitcoin mines are imported and are now going to be subject to tariffs. But regardless, again, I don't think that Bitcoin industry is helped by tariffs. So it would probably do well without any of the tariffs. For one, I don't think it's likely that, even though, you know, Trump has done a lot of damage with the uncertainty from tariffs. You're right that he's a wild card, and, you know, you don't know that exact day, you know, what the tariff on Vietnam is going to be, because it's going to change. It's going to change, you know, 5 times in that very day. But Trump's overall goal, I think it's very clear that he wants at least 10% tariffs in place permanently, given that that's what he stated repeatedly on the campaign trail. That was like the most modest of his proposal on the campaign trail, given that the deals that he has signed so far, or at least the phase 1 deals that he has signed so far, all leave up at least 10% tariffs as the bare minimum in place, based on the fact that when he announced the reciprocal tariffs, you know, the minimum for that was 10% as well. I think it's very clear to me that he wants at least 10% tariffs up on essentially every country. I think it's fair to say that is his goal. I think it's kind of odd to imply that's not his goal. But, you know, secondly, really? I wouldn't you know, generally I think, you know, uncertainty is really bad. Uncertainty drags on business investment, generally speaking, when there's uncertainty in the domestic economy, or even uncertainty about trade policy within the domestic economy. And believe it or not, when you tear up a bunch of fucking deals over and over again, like you're suggesting Trump is going to do, and also like Trump kind of has done, like he negotiated a deal with, you know, Mexico and Canada, then kind of went back on that one, and same thing with South Korea. Countries are not going to want to sign deals with you ever. They're not going to want to be your trading partners. The U.S. is going to lose out in export markets because, you know, there's going to be a bunch of people in Brazil saying, you know, or a bunch of people in China maybe saying, do I really want to rely on the U.S. for soybeans when I can buy soybeans from Brazil? And, you know, I don't know if the U.S. and China are going to go back into a trade war in 5 days. So I think there's a lot of harm done by the uncertainty that Trump is causing. And
yeah, to your first point, the question, like, you know, like Trump said he was going to do this on campaign. Trump also said he was going to release the list, but, you know what I'm saying? And like, I was the only one, I was again called a conspiracy theorist, all this kind of shit. So I was saying, if you release that list, it loses all power, but if you keep that list secret, now all of a sudden you have, you're up to strong arm a lot of potentially powerful individuals. Your second point, why would they still continue to do trade deals despite the fact that Trump is, like, again, that kind of proves my point as well, where Trump is kind of being iffy with a lot of this stuff. Because America has the greatest consumer market. Everybody wants to get into America. America can pick and choose. They're like the belle of the ball, essentially. Do you know what I mean? So imagine like the prettiest woman. It's like, you don't get all the offers. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, you're turning down all these guys. It's like, yeah, because she knows our value. You know what I mean? And like, in terms of the uncertainty itself, like, as American companies, it's quite clear. The certainty is quite clear. Put back all your HQs into America and pay your taxes in America, and then we'll be happy. Because, like, for example, as an Irishman, there's nothing I'd want to see more than the likes of like Dell, Intel, all these American businesses, all these technology companies do their, you know, proprietary rights in Ireland, so then they pay taxes in Ireland rather than having to pay taxes in the likes of America. So when you say like this could be beneficial or could not be beneficial, the fact that there's a lot of American corporations that are taking taxes in the likes of Switzerland, Ireland, all these like quote unquote tax havens, it'd be more beneficial if they paid those taxes in the American economy, correct?
Well, I mean, kind of, but, you know, there's a very good task called a DBCFT, which I think addresses this issue very well. But I think the way corporate tax is structured in the U.S. right now is rather inefficient. So I'm not committed to the claim that all avoidance of the corporate tax is bad, insofar as the corporate tax is just like generally bad in and of itself. But, you know, regardless, I think that's not the biggest issues that I have. So for one, like, I don't think, if there is uncertainty about what tariffs are going to remain, you know, there are going to be companies that say, I'm just going to wait it out. Like, I'm going to wait to see if these, you know, tariffs are going to get struck down by the courts. Why would I invest in building a factory in America now when I don't know if that's going to end up being a bad decision, because these tariffs are just going to go away? And I think, like, you know, there are companies who have stated things like that already. Additionally, when you I think there are just overall benefits from trade, and there are just overall costs from this, like, you know, reallocation of companies or whatever to the U.S. So it's not, you know, tariffs are not going to affect necessarily where the headquarters of companies are, right? Tariffs are not paid based on where the company is headquartered, you know, corporate taxes, but not tariffs. Tariffs are just paid on, where you're importing the goods from, right? So for one, you're going to see companies saying, so for one, just real quick, you're going to see companies internationally saying, well, why the fuck would I set up my company production in the U.S. when if I set up my company production in the U.S., I'm going to have to pay tariffs on everything that I import to make those goods, right? If I produce cars in the U.S., I'm going to have to pay tariffs on all the steel and tires that I import. Therefore, I'm going to set up my car company in Canada instead. And then and that affects U.S. companies too, by the way. Like, they have to pay tariffs on all the inputs that they use to produce their things. That's why tariffs are not even going to help manufacturing. But, like, additionally, like, you know, let's assume some amount of production, you know, does move to the U.S., which I don't deny tariffs can have that effect. There's no reason to believe that the aggregate effect in the economy would be positive, because there are just generally gains from specialization. There were gains from economies of scale. There were gains from exchange. Trade is just like an overall, like, really good thing.
Yeah. So, like, an example would be like I can't remember what brand it was, but it was something like Gucci or something like that. Basically, they made the whole whole product. They made in like Taiwan or in like some sort of like Asian country, and then they basically made sure just before the product was like finalized, they basically ship it to the Italian manufacturers, and they just literally put the logo on the bag. And then because it was finalized, or the intellectual property is based in Italy, pay the taxes in Italy rather than in the other countries that they're operating in. But like my whole kind of like my whole counter to what's going on is that there's a lot of these like powerful companies that it makes more sense for them to ship it halfway across the world and like just put the logo on something so they can do the tax. They can basically avail of the taxes in that country rather than actually doing it in America. So a lot of this is like, oh, we have to like build these massive corporations. No, like, they can all finalize in America and keep in America. The main thing that Trump wants is, I just want you paying your taxes in America, which again would benefit the economy. No,
so I think you're conflating some different types of taxes and things here. So to some extent, I agree with you. Like, insofar as there are we place super high tariffs on Taiwan or whatever, but not high tariffs in Italy. Like, you can get cases where, you know, most of the product will be assembled in Taiwan and then like shipped to Italy for like the last, you know, tiny little bit or whatever. There are also cases where, you know, by the way, like, we apply higher tariffs to like sneakers than to like slippers. So like companies will like add like a very thin like felt bottom to the shoe in order to get it technically legally classified as a slipper. Now, in my worldview, that is all a cost, that is all deadweight loss caused by an inefficient tax code. That is like the very thing that I do not want tariffs doing. I do not want tariffs incentivizing companies to, you know, like for example, another example, like companies will sometimes like put removable seats in the back of truck cars to get them classified as a different type of car. And then once they cross over the border, they waste more resources removing those seats again so they can sell them to American consumers. That is deadweight loss. That's pure economic loss that benefits no one. There's no good reason to have that. I think that's what distortionary taxes like tariffs cause. That is a bad, horrible thing. But like, additionally, like, do you know, so if I say the words comparative advantage, you know what that means?
No, just explain, just to be safe.
Yeah. So essentially, comparative advantage is just the ability of a country or person, but a country in this example, to produce something at a lower opportunity cost than another country, right? So, you know, essentially, like, countries will have different, what I call like factor endowments. Like, countries will have different resources to essentially start out with in some cases. I actually don't think most trade nowadays is kind of based on that. I can explain that in a second. But if, you know, the U.S., for example, is just, we have a lot of high skilled labor. We have a lot of materials more relatively available to us to like make planes. But maybe if we don't have as many materials available to us, right, we don't have as much low skill labor to produce sneakers or whatever. But China has a lot of materials to make sneakers. They have a lot of low-skilled labor that's useful in making sneakers. It could be the case that the opportunity cost of America producing planes is lower than China's opportunity cost in producing planes, meaning that it's going to take essentially more. You're going to trade off more resources when China. So in the example, when China makes a plane, they're essentially giving up. When China makes sneakers, they're giving up less planes than if the U.S. were to make sneakers, right? When the U.S. gives up making, if the U.S. were to make sneakers, they would have to give up more planes than China would. And following from that, you can show that, a trade, the beautiful, wonderful, wonderful thing about trade is that when do you let countries just simply specialize in what they're good at? So the U.S. is really good at making airplanes. We make mostly airplanes. China is really good at making shoes. They make mostly shoes. Both countries can end up with more of both goods than they would be able to produce on their own, right? So in this case, we would see, if the U.S. couldn't trade with anyone, it might be able to produce 10 shoes and 20 sneakers. But with trade with China, it could actually end up having, 20 planes and 30 sneakers. And China would have more of both goods too.
I get that, but for example, American technology companies are not allowed to sell to certain countries.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's typically because there's we think there's a national security risk in some of those things. Now, I think some of those protections are bad. I like free trade. Now there might be some cases where it's I don't want Lockheed Martin to be able to work for Russia because, our technology is, with regard to the military, it should be, benefiting us and not our geopolitical enemy. But if you don't like those restrictions, Trump is the one that just did a almost certainly unconstitutional export tax on NVIDIA selling chips to China.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
because again, what they do is they take the chips and then they just manufacture them for drones or for ICBMs or whatever. So what I'm trying to point towards is it's the same kind of situation we had previous in the conversation, where this whole aspect where it's you're saying something that technically we should all be able to agree with and all that stuff, but there's a lot of nuance in terms of, like I said, the whole premise. We want to increase more trading, we want to increase more products and services and all the stuff between the nations, all this kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, you don't,
when you factor in, what?
You don't think it represents a material increase in the standard of living when people can just have more goods overall? Countries are just more productive overall.
Yeah, because it's you ever watch Avengers, Thor?
I have.
Remember that scene where Odin's talking to Thor, and it's it can be used as a hammer to build. He's doing the speech in front of everybody. It's it can be used. This is a hammer. It can be used as a build tool to build, or as a weapon to destroy. It's the same thing with what you're saying with this statement, and that's why I'm being very particular with it, because it's if you have enemies that would gladly dance on your graves, you do not want to give them any sort of benefit. You want to cut them off, and you want them to basically die out. Correct?
Sure, but that'd be a very so kind of that might run into some issues, other issues. But I agree, there can be a national security justification for limiting trade in some cases, right? So to some extent, and by the way,
just to preface again, because I know I'm going to be clipped the shit out of this all stuff. But I'm just saying that they can die out either physically or mentally. Their idea can die out, and then for example, Saudi Arabia is a perfect example of this, where they didn't go down the Islamic extremists. They were no, we just take the Quran as a metaphor, and we want to do business with the West. And you see how that partnership clearly is an advantage. But when you flip it to the Hamas or Hezbollah, that's not going to be a relationship that can stand. Correct?
When will we finally get free trade with Hamas? Kind of. So, I would weigh the costs and benefits, right? So, certainly, it could be a cost of free trade that, insofar as free trade would help our geopolitical enemy, that would be a negative of it, right? But conceivably, there are cases where overall it could still be a benefit if consumers benefited by substantially more, and if we also got substantially more productive, because trade, tends to increase our productivity too. It tends to make us makes us better off as well. So. There are other considerations that outweigh the costs and benefits. But if you want a national security justification for trade restrictions, that is first of all, that's fundamentally not Trump's ideology. Trump's ideology is that essentially almost any trade is bad. Any trade deficit is bad and evil and needs to be cured. In fact, even trade surpluses, apparently, we should still have a 10% tariff on countries that we have trade surpluses with, like Brazil and Australia. These are countries that are our allies. These are countries that don't pose any economic threat to us. In fact, it would really only benefit us if we work together. Like, for example, there were gains from scale. So like, there are gains from scale both in like actual production of things and in the creation of new ideas, right? So if it is a case, like let's just say like Lockheed Martin is able to export new plane technology, newly built planes to allied countries like the Philippines, like Japan, like South Korea, who are in the South China Sea, Lockheed Martin has a bigger incentive to do research and development and produce new technology because the size of the market they can sell to is bigger. And then additionally, there's economies of scale with regards to production because there's always going to be some amount of fixed costs. Like I'm always going to have to, if I want to build, whether I want to build 100 planes or one plane, I might have to buy, the same size building, right, to just house the plane in. So, or just house all the equipment in. So as you produce more and more things, your sort of average fixed costs fall, which means in a lot of cases it's more efficient to essentially have, production in one place to sell to as many people as possible. So not only would Lockheed Martin have a bigger incentive to produce, to research and develop more things, but they would be able to produce things more efficiently if they were able to export technology to partners that I think Trump has alienated with these tariffs and reduced and increased trade barriers with, such as the Philippines, Japan, South Korea.
Yeah, like a very easy example to picture that is like, think of like you're running a McDonald's or some sort of like restaurant. It's like, is it going to be cheaper is it going to be more efficient to serve 100 people in a night or to serve one person a night? Because you have electricity, all these like static costs that no matter how many people are serving, it's still the same amount. You're going to generate more profit and all this stuff if you're catering towards more people. I agree. Yeah, 100%.
So I think that's a game that's been severely limited by the trade wars that Trump has initiated with even our allies, and that actively harms our national security. And so does, by the way, the tariffs that have been placed on intermediate goods, that meaning that U.S. companies, U.S. manufacturing companies now have to pay whenever they import parts for whatever they manufacture. And that means like, a lot of the capital, like if you look at the ISM manufacturing index, that has contracted for the 5th month in a row, right? If you look at there's 5 different regional Federal Reserve banks that all survey the manufacturers in their states. And like you can see their expected input cost, meaning the cost of things that they need to run their business, that line shoots straight up after Liberation Day. It's come down a little bit afterwards because Trump chickened out of some of those tariffs. But also their future capital expenditures have gone down a fuck ton, probably, because they expect to be able to export less, and they expect prices to go up because their consumers are going to buy less, and because they expect their own costs to increase, so they just simply can't afford to do certain capital investments right now, and because there's uncertainty as well. So I think those are all clear mechanisms by which Trump is actively harming relationships with our allies, our own national security by damaging relationships with our allies, as well as American manufacturing, and therefore, again, to some extent, American national security to the extent manufacturing is needed for national security.
But like what? Okay, let me give you the dynamic. Okay, you're saying with the allies, like what, like tariff percentage? I don't know if you, because again, I don't want to put too much strain on you and all this kind of stuff. But like, what do you think would be the fair or like the most optimal state between, let's say, America and South Korea then, or Japan, or one of these allies?
Probably. So like in a perfect world, it'd probably be like, it might be like, in a real world, I want as close to zero on both sides as possible. Now I would grant technically, like there might be like in a perfectly optimal theory world, there is such a thing as an optimal tariff. Now, in reality, even like it's very hard to know what the optimal tariff would be. Like how, like the government even getting that information would be difficult, and it's likely that if we increase trade barriers on Japan, they would increase trade barriers back, and that would kind of remove the gains from the optimal tariff. So in the real world, essentially zero on both sides between the US and Japan, I would say.
And if it was the case that, let's say, it was like 10% in favor of Japan, would you want to seek to correct that, or would you just leave it be for the sake of relationship?
What do you mean by 10% in favor of Japan? Do you mean like Japan tariffs our goods at 10%?
America had 0% tariffs on Japan, but Japan put in 10% or had 10% there from like, decades back or some shit like that.
Right. So, I mean, there could conceptually be a case where a truly brilliant master negotiator, right? Donald, King Daddy Trump, all right, comes in and eventually via his negotiation tactics gets trade barriers on both sides to zero. And in that world, that could conceivably be good. But one, I would just point out, Trump fundamentally wants at least 10% tariffs on, even countries like Japan, right, that are our pretty close ally. And secondly, like the costs, the deal so far have not given me any confidence that Trump is actually a skilled negotiator here. All the deals seem to be net bad. They don't even seem to be well defined because they're like phase one agreements that might not even turn into a real legally binding deal. And I would also add, like, it's by the way, the deal he eventually would get would also have to be so good as to justify the cost of uncertainty. And I think the cost of uncertainty so far has been very high. So I find it very unlikely any individual deal could be good enough to outdo that. But I would also add, like, just because another country is tariffing us doesn't make it optimal for us to tariff them back, right? So I think the primary harm of a tariff is on the country taxing its own consumers. So, at least generally speaking, America is typically going to be hurt more by retaliating to a lot of other protectionist policies that countries do to us than we would be if we just didn't retaliate to most of the, whatever protectionist policies they do impose on us.
Yeah, but like in the situation, let's say hypothetically that like Japan was like doing the 10% and he's doing the 0%, you would be in favor of like saying, okay, we're going to do a 10% at least, or like what way would you handle? Let's say you're sworn into office and Nonfon is handling the negotiations. How do we go with that?
Like me personally, again, like based on what I just said, like I would at least contact Japan because Japan is our ally. I find it unlikely that Japan wouldn't be willing to reduce trade barriers, especially because I think reducing their trade barriers would help, them as well. But like I would try to strike some deal with Japan to get them to lower trade barriers because I think trade barriers in general are bad. But I would not, place a 10% tariff on Japan simply because they have a 10% tariff on us. That seems suboptimal.
Yeah, so like if they're benefiting from from all your consumers and they're charging 10% on all products you try to sell to them, would it not be more fair, more balanced?
So that's a different.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's kind of a weird thing of fairness here. So, like, it's possible maybe, like, you think in some moral sense it'd be more fair if we had a 10% tariff. But that doesn't mean it's like economically good to. And like, I care more about like what is economically good because fairness is kind of ambiguous to me. But
yeah,
essentially, I think the primary harm of tariffs is on the country imposing them. Right? Like when Japan imposes tariffs on U.S. products, I'm sure U.S. producers are almost certainly going to be harmed a little bit, but the primary harm is going to be on Japan themselves. And responding to that via our own protectionist trade measures is only going to harm us more as well. So it's simply not worth it to retaliate and harm ourselves just because we think they're harming us.
Yeah, but to give the comparison to like actual warfare. Oh, one sec. I need like 2 minutes.
Sure.
Sorry about this.
Incredible. I will mention, I don't know if I want to get to it, that like dude, the average effective tariff rate that Japan imposed on us was like 1.64% or something. He needed to recharge his vape. True. These are some high-level ideas. High human capital individual we have here. This is the high skill labor that America specializes in. I only have like 20 minutes before I gotta talk to someone else, by the way, so might have to wrap up semi soon. Average UK Pakistani has a higher human capital than that. Probably. The average Indian immigrant to America is like 10x or more, or probably 100x this dude's human capital level. Oh my god. Also, you guys want something funny? This is the, I think I might have showed this on stream. I forgot. Do you want to see the stats he linked me? Deadass. This is the stats he linked me. It's a screenshot.
That's her.
Of another
you can
tweet.
Probably see why like I had to postpone tomorrow. This is basically my life. You know, it's what, like 20 to 11, and I'm still getting calls. Ridiculous. But yeah, sorry to get back on point.
Mm-hmm.
Like this whole aspect to it's like, look, what's a fair deal, all this kind of stuff, and if I'm like trying to make the case that it's like if we're uncertain whether or not this is a fair tariff, like 10% Japan versus 0% America, like the only way to actually solve that is by having this trade war and see who wins, correct?
No, so I don't think it. So I don't know what you mean by uncertain, right? So my point. So I think you might have misunderstood me earlier. So there is such a thing in economic theory. You could like of an optimal tariff, because there is such a thing as a country whose demand essentially, if a large country, their consumer demand affects the it's so large that it can actually affect the world price of a good. There is a scenario in which a country can impose a tariff and actually influence the terms of trade in their favor. But my point was just that generally, like, it's going to be it's very hard for the government to identify what those products are, because the government simply does not necessarily have that information. There's going to be complex, actually not necessarily super complex, but somewhat complex, variables involved in trying to determine like what the optimal tariff rate on a certain product would be. And I think you also open up the in that case, I think it would also open up the government to potential like regulatory capture and or like rent seeking, where essentially companies are going to see, oh my God, the government is imposing a tariff on an industry that might be beneficial to me. I'm going to advocate this tariff be expanded past the optimal rate, or this, the company. And I think we see that now, by the way, with people like Apple, giving gifts to Trump for certain tariff exemptions and things like that. People who bought Trump's meme coin, rubbing shoulders with Trump and getting 90-day exemptions.
Actually, sorry to go off. I don't want to go off topic too much, but what do you think of that whole thing where like everybody now is seeming to bow down to Trump?
I mean, what do you mean by bow down?
Like the Apple CEO was saying, here's a nice fancy trophy for you, even though we didn't really do anything, but here's a nice fancy trophy for you.
Like, to me, that's almost like transparent corruption to me. Like that, I feel that's like horrible. I think Trump is egotistical. I think Trump likes when people, kiss his ass. And I think part of the reason he does so many of these tariffs and turns them off and back on again 100 times is because he likes the power it gives him over people like Apple, like Nvidia. And I think Trump is so egotistical that it's easy enough to manipulate him by just giving him a trophy in public. I think that's pathetic. I think that's corrupt. And
again, sorry to go off to a topic on this, but related to Trump at least, did you see the way the new South Park episodes where they're handling Trump now? I
didn't watch the full thing. I saw a clip of, I think the first one where they were just begging them to sue him.
Yeah, they're gone completely nuclear, and I'm here for all of it. But the reason why I bring that up is that it's like certain parts of these deals, like when you look at the Paramount deal and why Jesus came down on the sermon, is I think a lot of these deals are being made for the explicit reason to try and enforce ideologies. So hence why South Park all of a sudden has Jesus back. It's all pro-Christian messaging, all this kind of stuff. That's just one thing I'd say as an observer from the outside. I'd just say that's one thing that at least the left wing has gotten right in terms of this whole aspect too. Like, why all of a sudden are we talking about Christian messaging? Why all of a sudden are like the trending is all about like becoming a Christian nation again, all this kind of stuff. Because that's oftentimes that like why these deals are being made, because they want to enforce certain things or certain ideologies and all that stuff. Which again mirrors back with the whole USAID thing. It's like, why are you spending it on the transgender thing? Why are you pushing all this like ideology? I thought you were supposed to help people, regardless of the ideology, so on and so forth. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Sure. I think I forget exactly where it was. I remember we were kind of talking about how we should respond to other countries' tariffs. I remember we were on that general line. I guess one thing I want to ask, like, do you acknowledge that Japan doesn't in fact put 10% tariffs on us, and that just in general, these countries are not putting nearly anywhere close to as high a tariffs as Trump said they were on Liberation Day on us?
Yeah, but Trump is hyperbolic. Like I keep trying to point a lot of these right wingers back, saying, here's all the messaging he said about the lists. He said we need it. It's a matter of justice, folks. We need to release this list. But as soon as he got in the office, he's doing the whole, what list? You guys still talking about a list? You know what I mean? So it's like that's Trump's character. And anybody, be a right wing or whoever, like if you can't recognize that or see that in Trump at the moment, I dare say you fell for the facade, my boy. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, I didn't think it's silly to like suppose. I mean, I think to be fair, I think I did answer the hypothetical how I would deal with these situations. But I also like to think it's silly to propose situations where it's like, oh, maybe there could be a case where a country is tariffing us so hard and it's like screwing us over so bad, when like you look in the real world and like prior to Trump's tariffs, which did lead to eventually a lot of retaliatory tariffs, like Europe had like an average of like 1.64% tariffs on us. Japan was like pretty close to that as well. I think Japan was like 1.8 something. Australia was like less than 1%. Like these are not exactly taking advantage of us, it seems like. Yeah,
but like even being allowed to participate in like the American economy and to use American consumers to benefit from like them buying foreign products, essentially, that again, like that's another way to look at this, where it's like, I don't care about the actual percentage, I just want to look at like who's benefiting majority from the trade. And when you look at like Trump's thing, he's trying to push it so that America is the only one that's capitalizing.
Well, I think Trump is fundamental. I think Trump has very deep misunderstandings of trade from everything I'm seeing. I think he's a mercantilist at heart and barely tries to hide it. But I mean, it's obviously like a mutually beneficial thing. So like, it is true that a lot of countries do benefit from access to our consumers, and like I don't think that's a bad thing, because I want other countries to do well. I think the world is probably better off overall if other countries also do well, except for, I mean, there might be some exceptions with like China in some cases, but generally speaking, I want other countries to do well, but also I want U.S. consumers to do well. I want the U.S. to get more productive. I want the U.S. to export more, and those are all things that are enabled by lower trade barriers, right? The reasons consumers are buying imported goods is because they view that good as a better deal, whether because it's it has a better mix of lower price and higher quality, and or lower price and lower quality, or whatever fits their preference. Like that's a that's a good thing. It's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, there is nuance to it as well, because like what you're saying should be a good thing, but like I said, I was going to explain with the nuance to it. A lot of these what would you call it, empathetic point of view or moral rationale to it can be weaponized against us. So like
no. So I think again, so like me personally, I do care about like the well-being of other countries, like all else equal. Like I do want like less people in Africa to be in poverty or whatever, and I think trade probably reduces poverty in Africa. But I think even like from a purely selfish point of view, right? If I only care about Americans, I would still not support tariffs because, I think American consumers and American producers, like over half of imports are either like capital goods or intermediate goods, not consumer goods. Those are things that greatly help U.S. consumers and producers.
Yeah, but well, again, here's the whole caveat to it. Like I think technology is a great thing, but when you analyze the history, you'll see, like, if we were to try and graph it out on like technological advancement, all this stuff, anytime that there's been like global conflict, that's increased or expedited technological advancements. But I would not go as far as to say we need to go to a war so we can update the technology, all this kind of stuff. The whole correlation doesn't prove causation, all this kind of stuff. But like, that's what I'm saying in terms of like my dynamic, the way I see it, it's like, yes, people are going to be suffering, but people have suffered since this whole game began. Do you know what I mean? More like thousands of years before we were even born.
Sure, but
Nonfon,
I think
like there's always been suffering, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? And how you go about that is always going to be subjective in terms of the prescriptions you're listing. But yes, sorry, go ahead.
as long as you want the U.S. to be better off, I think there's a very strong argument that free trade just like generally does that. So, you know, there are a lot of benefits even to innovation, like I mentioned earlier, because of economies of scale. You probably do see the incentive for innovation to increase with the size of the market, and that includes, you know, being able to export to foreign markets. And I want U.S. consumers to be better off. I want U.S. producers to be better off. I want more U.S. jobs, and I think trade leads to more U.S. jobs. I want higher wages. I think trade leads to higher wages. Like all of these, you know, good things, I think trade facilitates, and it's just like an overall good thing for America, even if I don't care about any other countries at all.
Well, like I said, we can use the example of Saudi Arabia. Do you know what I mean? I have no problem doing business with Saudi Arabia, but I have a huge problem doing business with Iran. You know what I mean? Despite the fact that they're both Muslim countries, one clearly has taken the what I'd call like a Western point of view of how they handle Christianity, and say, okay, as long as you believe this is metaphorical and you're not trying to wage any religious wars or terrorism, we're perfectly fine with that. Whereas when you look at the likes of Iran, it's like, no, like we're going to fight to the death and we need to wipe this person off the face of earth. You can't do business with something like that. That's been my main point on Nonfon so far, is that it's like certain people here, like on the planet, they don't care that they'll become the second Saudi Arabia or the Riviera of the Middle East. They don't care about that. They only have like a stated mission, which is to commit some sort of like heinous act. You know what I mean?
But yeah, right. But you know, again, like, so the thing you're like justifying though is like tariffs not only on our enemies, but also on most of our allies as well. And tariffs on not only, you know, things that might give our enemies an advantage, but tariffs on, you know, intermediate goods. You know, Trump is doing essentially universal tariffs that includes, you know, just goods that U.S. companies use to produce things that we need for national security. So, for example, like, you know, we need semiconductors for national security. Even Trump acknowledges that. That's why he bought stake in Intel, right? But a lot of like some semiconductor fabrication requires equipment, like specialized equipment that is only made in the Netherlands, right? And the Netherlands is our ally. They're in the EU. So, I mean, you know, every tariff on the EU applies to them, right? But, you know, they're our ally. They produced equipment that we need to make semiconductors. If you put a big tariff on the EU, that includes the shit that we need to make semiconductors for national security purposes. And the end result of that is either you're going to get less semiconductor production in the US because companies just simply like can't afford to buy, you know, as many of those goods, right? Or you're just going to get no semiconductor production in the US because companies are going to say, we're just going to start building semiconductors in Canada, because if I put my company in Canada, I don't have to pay any of these tariffs.
Like, okay, I'll approach this way. Yes, in terms of what you're saying there is correct. I don't disagree. But what the main thing I'm trying to drive home is this whole aspect. It's like the premise or the preface that you're saying to a lot of this is like, oh, well, they're our allies. But like what I'm saying is like, in the situation of like they're our enemies or they're not our allies, would you not agree that it's like the most like more tariffs, like tariff the shit out of them and all this stuff, like anything that we can use potentially prevent like actual physical war pointing out, would that not be a path forward? Or would you still say no, even if they're our enemies, we should still want to do business, all this kind of stuff with them?
So not usually. So it's a little nuanced, but for one, like the reason I'm mentioning the allies thing is because like if the justification for tariffs is national security, you know, the way Trump is doing them, I would say is not helping our national security in many ways. The type of tariffs that he's doing, the type of universal tariffs he's doing are harming national security, especially when you apply universal tariffs to our allies. That's going to harm our national security as well, because it's going to make them less likely to, you know, work with us on a lot of other things. But with regards to like, you know, countries that are actually our enemies, I think, you know, one thing is going to be like, I'm just going to view tariffs as like generally harmful for the economy, right? So it's going to be, you know, I'm going to weigh like, how big would the national security benefit from these tariffs be versus like the cost of the economy, right? If you just view tariffs as like not that harmful or even good for the economy, then you don't really, care. You don't have to care about as much as that. You don't have to weigh that as much because you're just saying like, oh, this is a W for the economy and a W for national security. Like, oh, easiest, like, win-win. For me, because I have to weigh those things, I'm going to come out a lot of times saying, it's simply not worth the cost for the economy to do these type of, to do these tariffs. But like additionally, it's not clear to me that tariffs are like ever really the optimal industrial policy, even if you want, production to be in the US, for example, of a certain good. Subsidies are typically, a better way to do that. That way companies like actually have to station in the US to get the subsidy. I think a lot of times with tariffs, you get issues with, either transshipment or production just moving to another country. Like, I do want at least some amount of semiconductors and batteries to be made here in America for national security reasons. If we just tariff Chinese batteries, you're going to end up with battery production in Vietnam a lot of times. And I like it better in Vietnam, but I want it more in the U.S. Right? So for that reason, I'd be more open to like offering a subsidy to actually get production in the U.S. instead of just another country. And I think you even kind of mentioned this earlier. Like you get issues with transshipment where China will send goods to Vietnam and then Vietnam will send them to us, and in some cases they can avoid the tariff. And I think subsidies can avoid that issue. But yeah, I think those are probably the two big things. I would, probably just add again, like I guess I would probably add, like, I think people greatly exaggerate the extent to which American national security is harmed by trade in the first place. Like, I don't think American manufacturing even was like harmed that much by trade. And like, therefore I don't think like it's not like super clear to me that like, it would actually increase our national security by that much, even if we did these type of tariffs that supposedly are going to bring, manufacturing back and make it so epic again or anything. But that's that's how I view it. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that you're saying, which is that's great. And like I'd even kind of point to, there's a lot of right wing Christian conservatives. I would point this the exact same thing where it's like charity, all this kind of aspect to Christianity that's there as well. But like my kind of like counter would be like if I was an Israeli, right, and it turned out like those strikes that went down in Tel Aviv, that we recuperated some of the debris and all the stuff, and it turned out that it was American produced technology that were in those ICBMs. Would it not damage the Israeli relationship with America, finding out that, like they got around and they basically bought your products and killed our people with your products?
Sure, but I think it would, but I also don't think I don't think tariffs would be effective at really reducing that. I think that's going to be more, protections for patents, protections for capital, sort of like export controls or whatever. Yeah, which I think the U.S. security
shit, because like. Sorry to cut you off, but like there's a lot of shit with national, when it comes to national security. It's like we don't give two fucks. We're not letting this happen. Like one key thing that was like with the whole science thing. Like look at Eric Weinstein. He's like, they're literally preventing us from doing physics. This is bullshit. Even though he's a mathematician, but hey, it is what it is. What I'm saying is like in terms of when it comes to national security, so there'll be certain thing where it's like we're not trading at all with this country. And not only that, but we're putting in certain sanctions to all our allies, saying if you do any of this particular trade, like microchips or whatever, with this particular country, we will not do any trade with you. But like I said, in terms of dynamic where it's like your allies, like yes, like even as a capitalist, a cold-hearted capitalist myself, it's like the more choice, the more interactions you have between two capitalists or in the free market, the more abundance you're going to create, which is the main goal to capitalism. So it's like I'm not really disagreeing with you when it comes to the allies. When it comes to the neutrals and or the enemies, I don't think we should have like a grandiose policy saying that we should just help these people, because clearly if they're neutral, it's unknown or uncertain, and it's particularly in the enemy's place, we should not help them whatsoever. We should be actually going against them and trying to undermine them whatever way possible we can.
Right. Well, I mean, the big thing is, again, I think trade is like mutually beneficial. So like if trade just has benefits for both U.S. consumers and producers and overall productivity and overall growth, I think it's going to be, overwhelmingly good for the economy in most cases. So it's not we're hurting ourselves a lot too when we, tariff our enemies, I would say.
100%. And I would even say, well, it kind of goes both ways as well. But like the fact that you have the most powerful military, you have ships all over the world. You've God knows what military tech. But in terms of the like certain requirements, like for example, like the EU was basically just using America as like their quote unquote military. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's fair that Americans are providing the military, all this kind of shit. Europe's not paying for any military, and then they're expecting it to be 0-0 in the tariff war. No, my friend. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I don't know. I kind of went over earlier. Like, I think the majority of the harm from tariffs is on the country imposing them. I do want to ask about just to move on from tariffs a little bit. So
it's
you said
show,
you're
bro.
not.
If you want to interrupt me, call me a fucking asshole. All the shit, it's all up to you.
No, yeah. Don't worry. I mean, I'm telling. I'm just, I'm warning you where the conversation is going a little bit. But like I did.
Go ahead.
You said you didn't know much about any of the stuff happening with the BLS or Federal Reserve.
No, to be honest, I thought you were saying BLM. I'm 100% honest.
Yeah. So, I guess you're not American, but the BLS, they're the agency that tracks the sort of statistics for the economy. There was a jobs report that came out that showed that job growth had actually slowed quite a bit, and it revised the job numbers for the previous 2 months down by a decent amount. And that's Trump essentially did not like those numbers, so he just straight up fired the commissioner of the BLS. And even prior to that, Doge was fucking around with the BLS and cutting certain staffs and cutting funding for it. So like the BLS had to make certain cuts to the prices it tracks to measure the inflation rate. That's kind of a very damaging thing for our institutions. Like, there are a lot of businesses and even the Federal Reserve that rely on some of that data. They're going to make worse decisions now. They're going to have higher uncertainty. No one is going to know for sure how much they can trust data in the future, because the president can just fire the person if they don't like the data. So now the people in the BLS have an incentive to, suck up to Trump a little more. And the person he appointed, or is planning on appointing, they're not confirmed yet, to the head of the commissioner of the BLS is like some insane economist who gets everything wrong all the time. Do you think that that's like a bad thing?
Like I said, in terms of the whole economic shit, like my main solution is like, guys, like this, like you were saying earlier, these are complex, robust systems to the point where it's like we don't even know what if these changes are going to be a good or a bad thing for, let's say, at least a decent chunk of the changes. Whereas, like I said, I'm not saying that like I'll live and die by anarcho-capitalism, but to me, it's the one philosophy or ideology. To me, it just makes the most sense, where it's like, lads, let's just let the fucking free market dictate this. And like I said, there's certain caveats to that, like we brought up with the whole national security, all this kind of stuff. But let's just let the free markets fucking roll, baby. Why the fuck are we doing all this overreach and bureaucracy? Like for example, why the fuck do I have to do my taxes, okay? And the government's going to keep me honest, right, by me doing my taxes myself, when they have all these government workers that could just be doing my taxes for me? You know what I mean? Why doesn't the government just say, here's your bill? Because we're not, at the end of a meal, they say, here's your bill. I don't have to calculate out using the fucking menu, like what I bought in the plate. Like, that'd be a bullshit business model. No?
I mean, I don't think there are a lot of, you don't have to be an anarcho-capitalist to agree with that one. There are a lot of, even a lot more left-wing people who agree with that too. But like, I agree. Like, that's how most countries do taxes, my understanding. So we probably do that as well. But
yeah, like, why the fuck can't we all agree? Come together one night, take a bunch of mushrooms, and just say, right, 10% flat tax for everybody. Is that Gucci? And then we just do the spending according to that.
Well, I mean, I would have a different tax code, but I mean, I guess I don't know. Like, I haven't spoken to you that much. I've interacted with you a few times on, I think, Sarah's panel, but to me, it really feels like if Biden did the same thing that Trump did here, you wouldn't just be saying like, oh, I don't know, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. You'd be saying, oh my God, it's unbelievably corrupt and evil that Biden fired the person who measures the jobs data because he didn't like the jobs numbers. Like,
I'm not going to disagree with you that happens, okay? And this is me extending the olive branch as much as I can, okay? I'm not going to disagree with you that happens, that there's plenty of people like that. particularly on Sarah's panel, but not just Sarah's panel, on all across this whole panelverse that we find ourselves on, that would take that degree. It's basically the whataboutism game, right? But if you're to look at my content specifically recently, there was a debate I done on Sarah's that was literally giving it was like as much of an olive branch as they could possibly say to the left wingers to say, yes, technically you guys are correct. Like this whole thing of like, it feels like 1930s Germany, 1940s Germany. Yes. And here's the system at place. Here's how it works. Here's on one side you have the nationalism, on the other side you have the socialism, and you have this fake, what I call a fake divide, to prevent the Hegelian dialectic from moving forward as a society. This is how it's working. And when you look at like, and I went through the whole history of the CIA, and when you go like a 1945 Operation Paperclip, 1947 National Securities Act, which enabled the whole CIA, create the CIA, and this whole infrastructure from what Alex Jones calls the deep state, all this stuff. And I outlined the whole fucking argument. It was a 2v2. I was basically gaslighting to saying that National Socialism isn't a political ideology. That was their take to it. You know what I mean? So if you're gonna like if you were hoping that like this was gonna be a thing of like, oh, we're gonna get like one of these like Trump fanboys, you know, and like, you know, bring them to the thing, it's like, no man, like literally ask me my opinion on Trump, how he handled Iran. I think he completely fucked that to high heaven. Sure. But there is a bit of responsibility that goes to the Iranian people themselves from not actually revolting against it. But Israel, again, like Israel shouldn't have done it, but Israel went out of its way to try and give the Iranian people the best chance possible to overthrow that government. But that always gets left by the wayside. But sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
I do also then want to ask you about interest rates, because you mentioned that earlier as well. Are you familiar at all with Trump's like public attack on Jerome Powell, asking him repeatedly to lower rates to, you know, levels that Europe is at?
I'd be doing the same thing. Like no word of a lie, I'd be doing the exact same thing. I'd be like, why the fuck can't you just print money? As a Bitcoin maxi, I'm like, yeah, print the fucking money. Show them exactly how flawed this monetary system is. And when Bitcoin hits 13 million and everyone's scratching their heads, it is what it is, folks.
So are you...
I mean, sometimes some people evolve and adapt, some people don't. It's a sad story, but...
So you're just like making an accelerationist argument that we should print more money to have more inflation so people use Bitcoin? Like that's...
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, but I guess
you have to fall. You have to learn how to fall in order to be able to walk. Correct?
Sure, man. Sure, but so we do agree. So you are aware like the Federal Reserve is supposed to be an independent institution. You're aware of that much, right?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so the president is not supposed to have any say in interest rates. Nor is the president really, not that it's illegal for him to technically do so, but, you know, it's a norm that the president should not be publicly lambasting the chairman of the Federal Reserve to lower them.
Correct. And the CIA would never act unethically.
Okay. Well, so, you know, to me, it is very, you know, it's very concerning when our president is doing that. He's, you know, publicly lambasting, you know, the Fed chairman, wanting him to lower interest rates to an insanely low level. I think that it's not only damaging in the short term, but like long term, people are not going to trust the Federal Reserve's ability to respond to crises in the future. People are not going to trust the Federal Reserve's ability to control inflation simply because the president now has, you know, some amount of control over the central bank. I think you're going to get you're going to get, you know, capital flight from the U.S. to some extent. I think you're going to get domestic businesses investing less as well. And you're going to get a sort of like fundamental corruption of the role that the Federal Reserve is supposed to have. To me, that is a heinous thing to do. Like that is a evil, horrible thing to do. I guess to you would agree that those negative effects are essentially all there. You would just say, but it'll get us to Bitcoin sooner.
I would say if the path to hell can be paved with good intentions, surely the path to heaven can also be paved with bad intentions. That's not an illogical thing to think.
So, I mean, like, I agree conceptually, like, there could be, like, accelerationist sort of, like, outcomes that could be good. You know, I guess, for one, I obviously just would be, I don't know what a Bitcoin-based monetary system looks like, and I'm very skeptical. I don't think that's Trump's goal, to be clear. I don't think that would happen from Trump fucking with the Federal Reserve. I don't think like the U.S. economy would entirely collapse. I just think we'd experience lower growth and probably higher inflation. and maybe later on down the line experience more inflation if the debt continues to get worse as well, especially if the president still controls the Fed to some extent when there's a big debt crisis. I think it's likely that you would see maybe not hyperinflation, but pretty very inflation in the U.S. is not seen in hundreds of years. But I think I guess it's again it really. It really does seem like if Biden, kind of had like the same policy, we would not be sitting here going, well, maybe in the future, one day this will lead to the Bitcoin-based monetary system after our current monetary system falls. Like, it seems like we'd just be saying it's really bad he did this.
Like, it's if you cannot recognize that the vast majority of modern day politics can be summarized in terms of the same crowd that goes to football games on Sunday. You know what I mean? Like that's just it is what it is. You know what I mean? In terms of the dynamic that I'd point out, it's that realistically, like a lot of unethical stuff not only has happened but continues to happen, but like it just doesn't get talked about. So that's why I point towards like the CIA. We had the church committees, and then all of a sudden the CIA would never dare act unethically again. We have no transparency what that organization's doing. And when you go back to the likes of like what Bluebird and MK Ultra revealed, they just continued on the research and what the Yazis were doing. You know what I mean? So like in terms of the whole like, the Democrats are better than Republicans, to me that's duck season, wabbit season. And someone says it's the goddamn liberals or the Democrats, we need to sort out Democrats, and then it'd be all of a sudden benevolent and all this kind of shit. You're telling me that this whole growing anti-Semitism thing, Yee with his new album, I mean, like that shit isn't in the zeitgeist, is not in the collective unconscious.
Okay, look, my time is a little limited. Maybe we can discuss some of that stuff later on. Like, I got someone else I have to talk to very soon.
Yeah, 100%.
I guess I would just as a last thing. So, could you just pretty briefly describe what you think like the Bitcoin-based monetary system, what on earth that would look like? Do you think people just be using Bitcoin as currency day to day? Like,
not necessarily. No, I think you'd still have fiat, despite its flaws. But in terms of like everyday transactions, Bitcoin itself is slow when you particularly compare it to the likes of XRP. But that's more kind of like that's like a quote unquote centralized system. I think in terms of like Bitcoin will just like Bitcoin. You can't have inflation in Bitcoin. You can't print more Bitcoin. There's only 21 million. There only ever will be 21 million. And in terms of when you look at it, what it is, which, like I said, it would be far more or too technical to get out now. But in terms of like even to have a full conversation on it, but to me, like that, if you're anyone who's trying to fight inflation and combat against like what basically is like what Karl Marx, like his critique of it, it's like this is a flawed system, whatever. If you want to fight back against that, I think Bitcoin is probably the best way, the most reliable bet. Like that's like, Ryan Gosling in The Big Short, where he's saying, I'm standing in front of a burning building offering you fire insurance. You know what I mean? Like that to me, the fire insurance is Bitcoin.
Have you heard of like
things will actually end up? Who's to say? Yeah,
go on. We can probably talk more about that later, but I'm just curious. Have you heard of like the term sticky wages before, or like nominal rigidity?
No.
Okay, just have you heard of the terms like debt deflation before?
Well, like, yeah, like for example, like if I'm only getting a 2%, if I'm averaging a 2% pay increase, but the inflation's 5%, like I'm losing 3% money year on year.
Sure, I mean that's real wages. I was just there's a semi-related term called debt deflation. I was curious if you had heard that term before. Because I think
I'm not fancy with the lingo.
Sure,
like I said, I'm borderline retarded.
Sure, implications of what you said. But listen, I'm sure we can talk more about monetary economics later, but I gotta talk to someone else soon. So, shout yourself out. Tell my viewers where they can find you at, what type of stuff you do, any cool stuff you got coming up. Let them know. Yeah,
so my name's Teriak. So like again, it's people have like insulted the way it's hard to spell, but think of like a yak, the animal yak. And then if it was near a tar pit, it might get some tar on it. It would be a tar-e-yak. I'm on YouTube. So like YouTube does like I got shorts coming out daily. I got like weekly videos on the long form. I have like, I go live once a week on Fridays, do Philosophy Fridays. Like I said, like even when you look at like our discussion, like I know we kind of got bogged down, but I was trying to like suss out in terms of just the core, where we're getting at from the core and philosophy. I think But what Destiny says, I think it's a very useful tool in terms of being able to cut down in terms of core and then build off your beliefs from there. So yeah, like I said, I do that with my co-host Damon. He's a British dude, so if you want some British sophistication, I mean, we're currently fighting back against this whole black pill shit. I think the next chapter is going to be feminists. We're just going to be moving on to like a lot of the modern day stuff in terms of like philosophy, how we handle ourselves. And we bring up the ancient Greeks all the time because we love the ancient Greeks, especially Heraclitus, Plato, Socrates, all the boys. But yeah, other than that, if you want some shit talking, probably X is the best place to go. And then, like I said, I think I'm on TikTok now, and I stream to Kick and Rum as well. But the main one is YouTube or X are the main two to get me. And like I said, I'm just an Irish leprechaun. I love a bit of chaos. I'm like that Loki character. So yeah, if you want some memes and giggles, stop on by. Also, well, shout out to Nonfon for having me on as well.
Hell yeah, fun time. Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk again. I linked to your YouTube channel, at least in my chats, and I know in your description you have all your Twitter and stuff, so people can check that out if they want to. And I will shout out myself as well. Okay, if you guys don't know in Teriyak's chat, okay, Nonfon 420, Twitch and Kick and Twitter, Nonfon on YouTube, streaming on all those platforms, and I guess Rumble at Nonfon as well, but no one watches there. Doing a charity subathon right now, okay? I've been streaming nonstop for 73 hours and 26 minutes, okay? As long as people keep donating to the charity that I'm supporting, the timer will go up, okay? I have another 30 hours at least here, okay? So, yeah, come check me out if you want to. I'll be talking to another person right after this, so I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, bro. Take it easy.
Yep. Lord. Just real quick, it's funny, like, we gotta fight inflation so bad. You can't print more Bitcoin. Have you heard of debt deflation? No. Have you heard of sticky wages? No. Like, you deserve a walk after that? Joke's on you. If you want to chat with me live, sub here or go to Nonfon420 on Twitch or Kick via the links below. Once again, please like and sub to help with the algorithm, and consider sending a donation through YouTube Super Thanks to directly support me, and I'll make sure to reply to any question you ask. See you guys next time.